She was his queen, his Luna, the one soul the moon herself had chosen for him. And on the coldest night this kingdom had seen in 100 years, Alpha King Kael Draven looked his mate dead in the eyes and told her she was nothing. He stripped her title. He stripped her name. He threw her into a blizzard and let the wolves howl her funeral song. But the wilderness didn't kill Seraphina Vale. It woke her up. This is a story about betrayal so deep it cracks bone, and a woman too stubborn to stay buried. Stay with me until the very end. If this story hits you where it hurts, leave a like and drop your city in the comments. Let me know where my people are watching from tonight. The torches along the throne hall guttered sideways, bending toward the eastern wall as though even fire wanted to flee what was coming. 200 wolves stood shoulder to shoulder in the great chamber, breath rising in pale clouds because the heating stones beneath the floor had cracked 3 days ago and nobody had bothered to fix them. That was the state of things in the Draven court, crumbling from the inside while every soul in the room pretended the stone was still solid. Seraphina Vale stood 12 paces from the iron throne. She could feel the cold of the flagstones bleeding through the soles of her boots, climbing her ankles, settling into her knees like something alive. Her hands were steady at her sides. She had learned a long time ago that wolves can smell the tremor in your muscles before they ever see it in your face, and she would not give them that, not tonight. Kael sat above her, not looking at her. That was the first wound, and she felt it land in the soft place between her ribs where the bond lived. He was looking at a piece of parchment in his hands, and his jaw was set so hard the tendons in his neck stood out like bridge cables. He was beautiful in the way a loaded weapon is beautiful. Dark hair pushed back from a face that could have been carved from the same black granite as his throne. Eyes the color of a winter sky just before it breaks open and buries everything beneath it. She had loved that face. She had traced those jaw muscles with her fingertips in the dark. She had pressed her mouth against that throat and felt his pulse jump like something startled and wild. Now he would not look at her. General Thorne stood to the left of the throne, arms crossed over his scarred chest. He was watching Seraphina with something she could not read. Pity, maybe. Or the particular discomfort of a man who knows what is about to happen and has already decided not to stop it. The murmuring in the hall died when Kael finally raised his head. "Bring her forward." 2 guards stepped to either side of Seraphina and gripped her arms above the elbows. She shook them off, walked the 12 paces on her own. Her boots made no sound on the stone. She stopped at the base of the throne steps and looked up at the man who was supposed to be her mate, her partner, her king, and she waited. Kael's voice came out flat, scraped clean of everything she had ever heard in it. 3 nights ago, a coded message was intercepted at the eastern border. It was addressed to Fenris of the Blackmoor Rogue clan. It detailed troop positions along our southern flank, patrol rotations, and the location of 3 supply caches that feed our border garrisons. The message carried the Luna's personal seal. The silence that followed was so complete Seraphina could hear the wax popping in the nearest torch. "That is a lie," she said. Quiet. Clear. The way you state a fact that requires no defense because it simply is. Kael's eyes finally found hers, and what she saw in them made her stomach drop straight through the floor. There was no conflict there, no question. He had already decided. He had decided before she ever walked into this hall, and everything happening now was theater. "The seal was verified by the Royal Cipher Council," Kael continued, as though she had not spoken. "The handwriting was matched to documents bearing the Luna's signature. And this morning, our scouts confirmed that Blackmoor rogues used the exact intelligence contained in that message to ambush and destroy the garrison at Hollow Creek. 14 wolves dead, 3 still missing." Seraphina's throat tightened. Hollow Creek. She knew those wolves. She had visited that garrison 6 weeks ago to bring winter supplies. A young soldier named Brennan had shown her a drawing his daughter made, a wolf with flowers growing out of its fur. She had told him it was beautiful, and he had blushed so hard the tips of his ears turned red. 14 dead, and they were laying it at her feet. Kael. She used his name deliberately, not his title, because she was not speaking to the Alpha King right now. She was speaking to the man who had held her face in his hands 3 months ago and told her he would burn the world before he let anything touch her. "You know me. You know what I am. I would cut off my own hand before I betrayed this pack." Something moved behind his eyes. A flinch, quick and deep, like a fish turning beneath dark water. Then it was gone. The evidence is clear. The evidence is fabricated. By whom? His voice rose for the first time, and there it was. The anger. She could feel it radiating off him like heat from a forge, and she realized with a sick lurch that it was genuine. He was not performing. He actually believed this. Someone had crawled inside his head and rearranged the furniture so thoroughly that he was sitting on his throne, looking at the woman he had sworn to protect and seeing an enemy. "I do not know by whom," Serafina said, "but I'm telling you, as your Luna, as your bonded mate, that I did not do this. Give me time. Let me investigate. Let me—" "You have no authority to investigate anything." Kael stood. The throne hall seemed to compress around him when he rose to his full height. He was massive. Not just tall, but dense with power that pressed against the air like something physical. As of this moment, by authority of the Alpha Crown and the laws of the Draven Kingdom, I strip Serafina Vale of the title of Luna. The words landed like axe blows. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room boring into her, and the collective intake of breath sounded like the hall itself was gasping. I strip her of all royal privileges and protections. Her vision blurred at the edges. She blinked it back. "And I banish her from these lands, effective immediately. She is to leave the palace within the hour and cross the northern border before dawn. If she is found within Draven territory after sunrise, she will be treated as a hostile trespasser and dealt with accordingly." The hour. He was giving her 1 hour. In the middle of the worst winter storm this region had seen in living memory. The temperature outside had dropped so far below freezing that wolves with full fur coats were dying in the open, and he was sending her out in it. "Kael," her voice cracked. She hated herself for it. "It is a death sentence. You know what is out there tonight." He looked at her then with something that might have been grief if it had been allowed to live long enough to take shape. But it was strangled in its cradle by whatever poison had been dripped into his mind, and what reached his face was only a cold, immovable resolve. "You should have thought about that before you sold our people to their killers." She stared at him. The bond between them was screaming. She could feel it pulling at the center of her chest like a fishhook buried in living tissue, and she knew he could feel it too because his hand twitched at his side and his breathing changed for just a second before he locked it down. He felt it. He felt the bond telling him he was wrong, and he was ignoring it. That was when Serafina Vale understood something that would reshape everything she was. The mate bond. The thing she had been taught since childhood was sacred and unbreakable and true could be overridden. Not by dark magic or ancient curses, but by something far more common and far more dangerous. A man's pride. A man's fear. A man's willingness to believe the worst about the person closest to him, because the alternative meant admitting he had been played for a fool. She straightened her spine. She pulled every fragment of pain and humiliation inward, packed it down into the space behind her ribs, and sealed it shut. She would not beg. She had said her piece. She had spoken the truth. And if the Alpha King of the Draven Kingdom chose a forged letter over the bond the moon herself had forged between their souls, then he could live with that choice. She could feel him waiting for her to break. She could feel the whole room waiting for her to crumble, to weep, to plead. That was what they expected from a discarded Luna. Collapse. Desperation. A woman on her knees begging to be believed. Serafina looked at Kael one final time, memorized the set of his jaw, the way his hand gripped the arm of the throne, the barely perceptible tremor in his lower lip that he was fighting to control. "You will remember this night," she said. Not loud, not with rage, with the calm, absolute certainty of someone reading a future that has already been written. And when the truth finds you, and it will not come gently. She turned her back on the Alpha King of the Draven Kingdom and walked toward the great doors. The crowd parted for her, not out of respect, out of the same instinct that makes a herd step aside when a wounded animal passes. Nobody wants to be too close to something marked for death. General Thorn caught her eye as she passed. His face was tight. His hand rested on the pommel of his sword, and she saw his fingers squeeze once, a gesture so small nobody else in the room would have caught it. She did not know what it meant. An apology, maybe, or a promise. She filed it away in the place where she was keeping everything she could not afford to feel right now and kept walking. The door swung open. The storm hit her like a wall of broken glass. She was 30 steps from the palace entrance when she heard footsteps behind her. Light, quick, the click of heeled boots on frozen stone. Serafina. She stopped, turned. Evelyn stepped out of the shadowed colonnade like something that had been waiting there all along. She was wrapped in white fur that made her look like a creature born from the snowdrifts. Her dark hair was pinned up in an elaborate arrangement, and her face held the particular serenity of a woman watching a plan execute exactly as designed. "I wanted to see you off," Evelyn said. It felt like the right thing to do. Serafina studied her, really looked at her, the way she had not allowed herself to look before, because looking meant acknowledging what Evelyn was, and acknowledging it meant admitting that the threat had been inside the walls the entire time. "You did this." Not a question. Evelyn tilted her head. A small, precise movement. Reptilian. Did what? Wrote a coded letter to rogue clans, forged the Luna's seal? That would be treason. I would never. You poisoned him against me. Darling! Evelyn's smile was a thin, surgical thing. I did not have to poison anything. I simply removed the gauze from his eyes. You were never strong enough for that throne. You were soft. You were sentimental. You treated the crown like a love letter instead of a weapon, and you are surprised that someone eventually took it from you? The wind screamed between them, driving ice crystals into Serafina's exposed skin. She could feel her eyelashes freezing. Her lungs burned with every breath, and there was a trembling starting deep in her core that had nothing to do with cold. He will find out, Serafina said. He will find nothing, because there will be nothing to find. Every thread, every document, every witness has been handled. You are a traitor in the eyes of every wolf in that hall, and by morning you will be a dead traitor frozen in a ditch somewhere between here and the northern ridge. And Kael, Evelyn paused, savoring the name like a piece of dark chocolate melting on her tongue. Kael will mourn you, briefly, and then he will move forward. With me. Serafina took one step toward Evelyn. Just one. But something in her face made Evelyn's smile falter for the first time. You should have killed me inside those walls while you had the chance, Serafina said. Because out here, you have no power over what I become. She turned and walked into the storm. The cold was a living thing. It wrapped around her within the first 100 yards, sinking through her cloak, through her wool layers, through her skin, and settling against her bones like a parasite making itself comfortable. The wind drove snow horizontally, so thick she could not see more than an arm's length ahead. The path that led north from the palace was already buried. She was walking blind. She did not stop. She walked because stopping meant dying, and something inside her, something older and harder than grief, refused to let her die on the terms Evelyn had set. Every step was a negotiation with a body that was shutting down. Her fingers went numb first, then her toes. Then the numbness crept up her calves and forearms with the patient efficiency of rising floodwater. Her thoughts began to blur at the edges, and she recognized the signs. Hypothermia. The body conserving heat for the vital organs, sacrificing the extremities like a general retreating to the inner walls. She talked to herself as she walked, not out loud, inside. A running monologue that served as a rope to keep her tethered to consciousness. Her hand found her stomach, pressed flat against it through the layers of frozen cloth. The secret she had been carrying for 6 weeks now. The reason she had refused to shift into wolf form, despite knowing it would keep her warmer, because shifting in the early weeks was dangerous, could end everything before it began. She was 8 weeks along. She had confirmed it with the pack healer 3 days before the world collapsed, and she had been planning the exact right moment to tell Kael. She had imagined his face, the shock melting into something raw and enormous and unguarded, because underneath all that iron control, underneath the Alpha King and the political machinery, there was a man who had once confessed to her in the dark that his greatest fear was becoming a father like his own. She had been going to tell him he would be different, that she would make sure of it, that their child would know what it felt like to be held without conditions. Now she was dying in a snowfield with his child inside her, and he did not know, would never know. Because she would freeze to death before sunrise and the snow would cover her body, and by spring there would be nothing left but bones. She fell. Her knees hit the snow, and she did not feel the impact, which was worse than pain because it meant the cold had won that territory. She tried to stand. Her legs would not obey. She tried again. Nothing. So this was how it ended, not with fire, not with a battle worth singing about. Face down in a drift, 5 miles from a palace full of wolves who had watched her walk to her death and done nothing. She curled onto her side, drew her knees up toward her chest, wrapped her arms around her middle, around the tiny, impossible life sheltered there, and she made a sound that the wind swallowed whole. "I am sorry," she whispered, to the child who would never open its eyes, to herself for not being faster, smarter, strong enough to outmaneuver a woman who had played the long game while Serafina was busy believing that love was armor. The snow was warm now. That was the cruelest trick of all. Hypothermia's final gift. The body stops fighting, and the cold feels like a blanket, like bathwater, like the press of a lover's body in the middle of the night, and you sink into it gratefully because you are so tired and it feels so good to stop. Her eyes closed. The last thing she registered before consciousness left was the sound of wolves. Not howling, running. The heavy rhythmic compression of packed snow under massive paws, getting closer, and a voice cutting through the wind like a blade through cloth. "Over here. She's over here. Move." Hands on her body. Enormous hands, rough and hot against her frozen skin. She was lifted, wrapped in something that smelled like wood smoke and animal hide, and a sharp herbal scent she could not identify. She tried to open her eyes and managed a slit. A face above her, hard angles. A scar that ran from the left temple down through the cheekbone, thick and white and old. Eyes the color of green ice. "Stay with me." The voice was rough, not gentle, a command, not a comfort. "You do not get to die out here, not on my watch." She wanted to tell him that she was not dying by choice, that she had been thrown away, that the man who was supposed to protect her had fed her to the storm because a beautiful snake in white fur had whispered the right words into his willing ear, but her mouth would not work. So she did the only thing left. She let go and let the stranger carry her into the dark. 3 days. That was how long Serafina existed in the space between alive and dead. 3 days of fire and ice warring inside her body, while a woman named Marin pressed heated stones against her chest and forced warm broth between her cracked lips and watched her with the calm, clinical attention of someone who had pulled too many frozen bodies out of the snow to be sentimental about the process. She surfaced in fragments, a ceiling of rough-hewn timber, the crackle of a fire. Voices outside the room, arguing in low, urgent tones, the smell of pine resin and dried meat, a sharp, cramping pain low in her belly that made her cry out before she was fully awake. And Marin was there instantly, hand on her stomach, pressing, feeling, her face unreadable. "The child!" Serafina gasped. Marin looked at her, long and steady. Alive. Holding on. Barely. Serafina closed her eyes, and something broke open inside her chest that was so enormous and so raw it did not have a name. Relief is too small a word. Gratitude is too civilized. It was something feral and fundamental, the recognition that she was not alone in this body, that the last piece of what she had been was still intact, still fighting, still clinging to existence with the same stubborn ferocity that had kept her walking through the storm. "Where am I?" Ironhold, Northern Territories, Rowan's camp. "Who is Rowan?" The door opened before Marin could answer. The man who stepped through had to duck his head to clear the frame. He was built like something designed for endurance rather than speed. Broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, arms that looked like they had been shaped by years of swinging heavy things at other heavy things. The scar she remembered from the snowfield was livid against his tanned skin, and his green eyes swept the room before settling on her with an expression she could not decode. "You are awake," he said. "Barely. You have been out 3 days. You almost did not come back on the second night. Your core temperature dropped low enough that Marin was ready to call it." "Marin does not call anything," Marin said flatly from the corner. "Marin keeps working until the body is cold or the patient is complaining. You are complaining. Good sign." Serafina tried to sit up. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. She made it to a half recline, propped against a pile of furs that smelled like the man standing in her doorway. "You are Rowan," she said. "Rowan Blackthorn, Alpha of the Northern Hold." "I did not know there was an Alpha in the Northern Territories. That is by design. We do not advertise." He pulled a rough wooden chair to her bedside and sat. The chair groaned under him. "You are Serafina Vale. former Luna of the Draven Kingdom, banished 3 nights ago in the middle of a Class 5 storm for alleged treason. She flinched at the word alleged, not because it was wrong, but because it implied there was still a question, and from where she was lying, broken and half frozen in a stranger's bed, the question felt academic. How do you know who I am? Because I make it my business to know what happens south of the ridge, especially when the Draven court starts making decisions that look more like suicide than strategy. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Banishing a Luna in winter is not politics. It is murder dressed up in legal language. Every alpha on this continent knows that. The question is why? Because a woman named Evelyn forged evidence that I conspired with rogue clans. Evelyn. His jaw tightened. A small controlled movement. Dark hair, pale eyes. Arrived at the Draven court about 8 months ago. Presented herself as the daughter of a minor southern lord. You know her? I know of her. Her name is turned up in places it should not be. Border crossings. Black market supply chains. Encrypted communications between rogues who are supposed to hate each other but keep showing up at the same rendezvous points. He paused. She is not a minor lord's daughter, Seraphina. She is a weapon. And your mate invited her into his bed and his war room, and now he is too deep in it to see straight. The words hit harder than they should have, because they confirmed what she had been circling around without wanting to land on. Cale had not just been deceived. He had been compromised. Evelyn had not simply lied to him. She had become indispensable, had woven herself into his decision-making so thoroughly that removing her would mean unraveling the fabric of his authority. And Kael, who feared weakness the way other men feared death, would tear out his own heart before he admitted he had been played. I have proof of nothing, Seraphina said. The admission tasted like ash. She told me herself, outside the palace, after the banishment. She laid it all out like she was reading a grocery list. Every thread handled, every witness dealt with. There is nothing to go back with. Rowan studied her. You're thinking about going back. Every part of me that is still the Luna is thinking about going back. 14 wolves died at Hollow Creek because of intelligence she sold to rogues while wearing my face. My people are in danger. My kingdom is not your kingdom anymore. His voice was not cruel. It was factual, the way a surgeon states a diagnosis. Cale Draven stripped you of title and territory in front of witnesses. Under pack law, you have no standing to bring charges, demand investigation, or enter Draven land without risking execution. I know. Then you know that going back right now is not brave, it is stupid, and I have not spent 3 days keeping you alive so you can march back into a trap and finish what that storm started. The silence between them was thick enough to cut. Seraphina looked at Rowan Blackthorn and tried to find the angle. The play. The reason a man she had never met would pull a dying stranger out of a blizzard and invest 3 days and significant resources in keeping her breathing. Wolves did not do that without a reason. Power was always transactional. She had learned that much from the Draven court. What do you want from me? She asked. Right now? I want you to eat something. You have been running on broth and willpower for 3 days, and the child you are carrying needs more than that. She went very still. Marin told you. Marin did not have to. I can hear it. 2 heartbeats. Yours and the little one's. Faint, but there. He said it without drama. Without the loaded significance that anyone connected to the Draven court would have attached to the information. An alpha's heir born in exile. It was the kind of revelation that could start wars or end them, and Rowan mentioned it the way he might mention the weather. Nobody can know, Seraphina said. Nobody will. Not from me, not from Marin. What you carry and what you choose to do about it is your business. He stood. The chair scraped against the stone floor. But you should know something before you start making plans. 2 weeks before your banishment, 3 of my scouts intercepted a rogue supply convoy crossing the northern pass. The rogues were carrying crates of weapons stamped with the Draven Royal Forge mark. Not stolen, purchased. With Draven treasury funds. The implications of that statement unfolded in her mind like a poisoned flower opening its petals. Evelyn is funding the rogues, Seraphina whispered. With your mate's own money. From inside his own palace. And the weapons those rogues are carrying will be used to attack the very borders Kael thinks he is protecting. Rowan moved toward the door. Eat, rest, get strong. Because when you are ready, We are going to have a very long conversation about what is actually happening in the Draven Kingdom. And you are not going to like any of it." He left. The door closed behind him, and Seraphina sat in the firelit quiet, with her hand pressed against her belly and the sound of 2 heartbeats filling the space between her ribs. One of them was hers, tired, damaged, still beating out of pure, irrational defiance. The other was new, small, fierce in the way that only things fighting to exist can be fierce. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since Kael Draven looked through her like she was made of glass, Seraphina Vale began to plan. 12 days passed. The storm that had nearly killed her settled into a grinding, relentless cold that locked the northern territories in gray ice. Seraphina healed slowly, grudgingly, her body fighting back from the edge with the stubborn inefficiency of something that had been pushed too far and refused to be pushed again. Marin monitored the pregnancy with a clinical detachment that Seraphina found oddly comforting. No false reassurances, no warm platitudes. Just data. Heartbeat is stronger today. You are keeping food down. The bruising on your ribs is fading. Do not shift. Do not overexert. Do not do anything stupid. Your bedside manner is extraordinary. I am not interested in manner. I am interested in outcomes. On the 8th day, Seraphina walked outside for the first time. The northern camp was larger than she had expected. Not a handful of tents in a clearing, but a fortified settlement built into the natural architecture of the mountain, with stone walls that followed the contours of the ridge and wooden structures that looked as though they had grown out of the rock rather than been built on top of it. Wolves moved through the compound with the quiet efficiency of a military operation. Patrols coming and going, sentries on the walls, a forge throwing sparks into the gray sky. Rowan found her standing at the edge of the training yard watching his wolves spar. They were different from Draven soldiers. Less polished, but more adaptable. They fought dirty, creative, using the environment as a weapon. One fighter kicked loose snow into her opponent's eyes, then dropped low and swept her legs out from under her in the same motion. "You are supposed to be resting," Rowan said, appearing beside her with the unnerving silence of a man twice his size. "I have been resting for 8 days. If I rest any longer, my muscles will forget how to work." Marin says a lot of things. I am standing in the cold watching people fight. I am not running a marathon. He almost smiled. She caught the ghost of it at the corner of his mouth before he caught it and put it away. "Tell me about Evelyn," Seraphina said. "Everything, not just the weapons, not just the rogues. I want the full picture." Rowan was quiet for his long moment, watching his wolves. Then he spoke, and what he said peeled back the skin of everything she thought she knew about the last year of her life. Evelyn had not arrived at the Draven court by accident. She had been placed there by a network of rogue clans that had been consolidating power along the borders for over 2 years, buying alliances, eliminating rival pack leaders, and systematically undermining the stability of the major kingdoms. The Draven Kingdom was the keystone. Control the Dravens and you control the central territories, the trade routes, the military infrastructure that held the continent's power balance in place. "She is not the mastermind," Rowan said. "She is the instrument. Smart, ruthless, adaptable, but she takes orders. The question I have not been able to answer is from whom? And the forged letter, the treason charges? Removing you was essential. You were the one person in that court with enough influence and enough closeness to Kael to see through the operation. As long as you were Luna, Evelyn could not fully control the information flow. You had to go." Seraphina stared at the training yard without seeing it. The pieces were assembling themselves into a picture so ugly she wanted to look away. But she forced herself to keep staring because looking away was how she had ended up here in the first place. She had looked away from the small signs, the way Evelyn always seemed to know about council meetings before they were announced, the way certain advisors had been quietly replaced over the past 6 months, the way Kael's temper had shortened and his trust had narrowed until Seraphina was the only one left who ever challenged him, which made her the biggest threat. Which made her the easiest target. "I was an idiot," she said. "You were a Luna trying to hold a court together while the floor was being pulled out from under you. That is not the same thing." She looked at him. He was watching the sparring with an expression she was beginning to recognize. Controlled intensity. The look of a man who had spent years studying a problem from a distance and was getting very, very tired of waiting. "You want to move against her," Seraphina said. "I want to move against the network she represents." Eveline is a symptom. The disease is bigger. And you need me for that. I need what you know. 8 months inside the Draven court, close to the king, with access to documents and personnel and patterns that I cannot get from the outside. Your memory is the best intelligence asset I have. He turned to face her fully, but I will not pretend that is the only reason I pulled you out of that snow. My scouts found you by accident. We were tracking a rogue patrol that had crossed into our territory, and one of them picked up your scent half a mile from the drift where you went down. Accident, luck, whatever you want to call it. But once I knew who you were, I made a choice, and that choice was not strategic. It was because leaving a pregnant woman to freeze to death in a political dispute is the kind of thing that rots a man from the inside out, and I will not carry that. It was the most he had said to her at one time, and the least calculated. She could feel the honesty in it like heat from a fire, and it made something inside her chest ache in a way that was entirely different from the grief she had been carrying. "All right," she said. "What do you need to know?" They talked for 4 hours. Rowan asked precise surgical questions about the Draven court structure, and Seraphina answered with a memory that surprised even herself. Names, dates, patterns, the slow, invisible rearrangement of power that she had sensed but never mapped. Laid out in sequence, spoken aloud for the first time, it was devastating. By the time they finished, Rowan's face had settled into a grim mask. "It is worse than I thought," he said. "How much worse? She is not just controlling Kael. She is dismantling the kingdom's ability to defend itself from the inside, replacing competent commanders with loyalists, diverting resources to non-existent projects, creating debt obligations with southern merchant guilds that will give them leverage over Draven trade routes within 6 months. By the time the rogue clans make their move, there will be nothing left to fight with." "How long? Based on what you have told me?" "They will move before the winter breaks, maybe sooner." Seraphina stood. Her body ached. Her ribs throbbed where the bruising was still healing. The child inside her was a weight she carried with a ferocity that frightened her sometimes, because it was rewriting her priorities in real time, and she could not tell yet whether that was making her stronger or more vulnerable. "Then we do not have time to rest," she said. Rowan looked at her, green eyes, scarred face, a man built for the long war, not the quick victory. "No," he said, "we do not." That night, Seraphina stood alone on the northern wall of the compound and looked south toward the Draven kingdom. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks, and the stars were so thick they looked like someone had shattered a mirror against the dark. Somewhere beyond those mountains, in a palace full of crumbling alliances and poisoned counsel, the man who was supposed to be her mate was sleeping beside the woman who had orchestrated her death. She pressed her hand against her belly. "Your father does not know you exist," she whispered to the darkness. "And when he finds out, it will either save him or destroy him. I have not decided which one he deserves." The wind picked up. The stars burned cold and indifferent overhead. And 500 miles south, in the throne room of the Draven Palace, Eveline stood before a mirror and smiled at her reflection because a messenger had just arrived from the northern ridge with a report. No body found. No trace. The storm should have finished the job, but there was no confirmation. Seraphina Vale might still be alive. The smile did not falter. It sharpened. "Find her," Eveline said to the shadow standing behind her. "And this time, do not leave it to the weather." The shadow behind Eveline did not move like a person. It moved like smoke given weight, separating from the dark corner of the chamber with a fluidity that suggested joints and bones were more of a suggestion than a requirement. When the candlelight finally caught its edges, it became a man. Thin. Tall. A face like a hatchet blade, all angles and no softness, with eyes that sat too deep in their sockets and reflected light the way a dog's eyes reflect light. Wrong, flat, hungry. His name was Kael. No last name, no pack affiliation, the kind of wolf who had scraped his own identity down to a single syllable because everything else was excess weight, and excess weight slows you down when you are running from the things you have done. "The Northern Territories are not friendly ground," Kael said. His voice was dry, papery, like something left in the sun too long. "If she crossed the ridge alive, she is in Blackthorn's territory. His people do not welcome strangers, and they do not let them leave." Eveline turned from the mirror. The candlelight carved her cheekbones into something architectural. then she is either dead in the snow or a guest of the one alpha on this continent who has been watching us for 2 years. Neither option is acceptable without confirmation. Sending a team into the northern hold is a declaration of hostilities. I am not sending a team. I'm sending you. She crossed the room. Her footsteps were silent on the thick carpet, and when she stopped in front of Kale, she was close enough that he could smell the jasmine oil she wore at the base of her throat. A calculated distance. Everything about Evelyn was calculated. The space between her body and another person's was a weapon she deployed with the same precision other people used knives. Find her. Confirm she is dead. If she is not dead, make her dead. And do it quietly enough that Rowan Blackthorn spends the next 6 months wondering whether she wandered back into the snow on her own. But damn, keep on. Kyle's flat eyes did not blink. And if the child complicates things? The silence that followed was a living thing. It filled the space between them and pressed against the walls. What child? Evelyn's voice did not change, did not rise or fall, but something behind her face shifted the way tectonic plates shift miles beneath the surface. Invisible. Catastrophic. The palace healer. Marin was not the only one who examined the Luna before the banishment. Old physician Aldrich ran standard blood work 6 days prior. The results were sealed in the Luna's private medical file, which I accessed 2 hours ago. And 8 weeks pregnant at the time of banishment, give or take. Evelyn stood very still. Her breathing did not change. Her heartbeat, which Kale could hear because his senses had been sharpened by years of hunting things that did not want to be found, maintained its steady, metronomic rhythm. She was processing, recalculating, running the new variable through every scenario she had constructed and watching the outcome shift. Kyle does not know, she said. Not a question. If he knew, you would know. A pregnant Luna changes the political calculus entirely. Banishment of a mate is one thing. Banishment of a mate carrying the alpha heir is an act so extreme that even his own generals would break ranks. Then he cannot find out. Evelyn's hand found the edge of the vanity behind her. Her fingers closed around the carved wood, and her knuckles went white. It was the only crack in the porcelain, the only sign that the news had hit something vital. Not now, not ever. That child does not exist. Do you understand me? If Seraphina is alive, if there is even a possibility that she is carrying the Draven heir in her body, then everything we have built collapses. Every alliance, every carefully placed operative, every single thread I have spent 2 years weaving into this court unravels the moment a squalling infant with Kael's bloodline shows up on someone's doorstep. Kyle watched her the way a predator watches another predator, with respect, with wariness, with the quiet understanding that the creature in front of him was just as capable of killing him as he was of killing anyone else. I will leave tonight, he said. You will leave now. He turned toward the door, paused. If I find her alive and the pregnancy is advanced enough to show, Rowan Blackthorn will already know. He will have heard the second heartbeat, which means killing her quietly becomes significantly harder because he will be protecting her, and Blackthorn does not protect things halfway. Then you will have to be more creative than quiet. Evelyn sat down at the vanity and picked up a silver hairbrush. Her reflection stared back at her with an expression that could have been carved from marble. I did not build this to watch it burn because one woman was too stubborn to die when she was supposed to. Kael left without another word. The door closed behind him, and Evelyn drew the brush through her dark hair with long, measured strokes, counting each one the way she counted everything, deliberately, patiently, the way a person counts down to detonation. 500 miles north, Seraphina was learning how to fight again. Not the way she had been taught in the Draven court, where combat training for the Luna was ceremonial at best, choreographed demonstrations designed to show the queen could hold a blade without cutting herself. Theater. Rowan's training was something else entirely. It was ugly and functional and built on a single principle that he stated once, on the first morning, and never repeated because he expected her to remember it. In a real fight, the one who survives is the one willing to do the thing the other person is not. They trained in the yard behind the main hall, in ankle-deep snow that had been packed down by boots until it was hard as concrete. Seraphina's body was still recovering. She tired fast. Her balance was off. The pregnancy was barely showing, a slight firmness low in her belly that she could hide under loose layers, but she could feel it in her center of gravity. Something had shifted. She was not the same animal she had been 2 months ago. Rowan did not go easy on her. He came at her with wooden training blades, and when she failed to block, the impact left welts that Marin would catalog and treat with the disapproving efficiency of a mechanic logging damage on a vehicle that someone keeps driving into walls. "You are thinking too much," Rowan said on the third morning, standing over her after she had landed on her back for the 4th time. He was not breathing hard. She was gasping like a landed fish, staring up at a sky the color of old pewter. "I am thinking about how to not get hit." "That is the wrong thought. You should be thinking about where to put the blade when you get inside my guard. Getting hit is inevitable. The question is what you accomplish between the hits." He offered his hand. She took it. His grip was dry and rough and enormously strong, and he pulled her up like she weighed nothing. "Again," she said. "Marin said 20 minutes. Marin is not here. Marin is always here." He nodded toward the upper window of the main hall, where a face was visible behind the frosted glass, watching them with the focused displeasure of a woman compiling a detailed list of objections. "She has been timing us since we started. We have about 4 minutes before she comes down here and ends this session personally. And trust me, you would rather face me with a training blade than face Marin with an opinion." Serafina wiped blood from her lip where the last strike had caught her. The cold air stung the cut. She could taste copper and salt. "Again," she said. Rowan studied her for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not softness. Recognition. The look of a man who had just identified something in another person that he understood on a molecular level. He raised his blade. "Guard up." They went again. In the evenings, Serafina worked with Rowan's intelligence network. It was smaller than anything the Draven Court operated, but it was faster, more agile, and run by people who had learned their tradecraft in the field rather than in lecture halls. A woman named Sarah, no relation and no sense of humor about the coincidence, managed a web of informants that stretched from the Northern Territories down through the Midlands and into the fringes of the Draven border. Information came in fragments. Coded messages, dead drops, verbal reports from scouts who moved through the wilderness like ghosts. Serafina sat at a rough wooden table in Rowan's war room and assembled the fragments the way she used to assemble court intelligence, looking for patterns, connections, the places where independent data points converged on a single conclusion. "Evelyn has replaced 3 more border commanders in the last 2 weeks, she said to Rowan, who was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed and his eyes closed. She had learned that he listened better with his eyes closed, something about reducing input channels to sharpen the one that mattered. "Who?" "Graves at the Eastern Garrison, Torin at Blackwater Crossing, and Farah at the Southern Watchtower. All 3 were veterans. All 3 had served under General Thorne. All 3 were replaced by wolves who transferred in from the Southern Territories within the last 6 months. Evelyn's people, or the people behind Evelyn's people. The replacements do not report to the military chain of command. They report directly to a new administrative office that Evelyn created 3 weeks ago. She calls it the Crown Oversight Council." Rowan's eyes opened. She built her own command structure inside the existing one. Parallel authority. She does not need to overthrow the military. She just needs to make it irrelevant. By the time anyone realizes the real orders are coming from her office and not the war room, the border garrisons will be staffed entirely by her loyalists. "And Kael?" The name still landed like a stone dropped into water. Ripples moving outward through her chest, disturbing the surface she worked so hard to keep flat. Kael sees what she shows him. Filtered reports, curated briefings. She has isolated him so gradually that he probably does not even realize his information environment has been compromised. He thinks he is making independent decisions. He is making the decisions she has pre-selected for him. That requires either extraordinary skill or extraordinary access. She has both. She is in his bed, Rowan. She is the last voice he hears before sleep and the first voice he hears in the morning. She controls the most intimate information channel a person has, and she is smart enough to use it without being obvious. The silence after that was heavy, loaded with things neither of them said. Rowan watched her across the dimly lit room, and she could feel his assessment, not of her intelligence or her usefulness, of her pain. He was measuring how much weight she was carrying and whether the structure could hold. "When was the last time you slept through the night?" he asked. "I do not remember." That is the answer I expected. Sleep is not a priority. Sleep is the only priority. Everything else depends on it. Your body is building a life inside itself while simultaneously recovering from an event that should have killed it, and you are running an intelligence operation and training in combat 6 hours after Myron told you to rest. Something is going to break. When it does, it will not ask your permission, and it will not wait for a convenient time. I cannot afford to stop. You cannot afford to collapse. There is a difference. He pushed off the wall, crossed the room, stood over the table where her notes and maps were spread like the internal organs of a kingdom being dissected. 3 hours, eat something, sleep for 3 hours, and come back. The intelligence will still be here. And if something comes in while I'm asleep, then I will handle it. That is what I do. She looked up at him. Exhaustion was making her honest in ways she could not afford during daylight hours. "Why do you care whether I sleep?" "Because you are the only person alive who has seen this operation from the inside, and if you burn yourself out, I lose the best asset I have ever had. Self-interest. Do not read anything more into it." He held her gaze long enough for both of them to know he was lying, and then he left the room. Serafina slept. Not 3 hours. 5. She slept so deeply that Marin checked her pulse twice, and when she woke, the first thing she felt was the child moving. Not a kick. Something subtler. A shift. A presence making itself known, pressing against the wall of her body from the inside like a hand testing the strength of a door. She lay still in the dark and felt it happen. The first real, undeniable evidence that the life inside her was not a concept or a secret or a political liability, but a living thing with its own agenda and its own timetable and its own stubborn insistence on existing. Her throat closed, not from grief this time, from something so fierce and so enormous that her body did not have a container for it. She pressed both hands against her belly and held them there, and for a moment the war and the betrayal and the frozen wasteland of her former life fell away, and there was only this: a mother, a child. The oldest alliance in the world, formed without negotiation, sealed without words. Then the moment passed, and the war came flooding back, and Serafina got out of bed and went to work. The break came 17 days after her arrival at Ironhold. A scout named Decker, a wiry, fast-talking wolf with a face like a ferret and an eidetic memory for terrain, came in from a 3-day run along the eastern border. He was half-frozen and vibrating with the particular urgency of someone carrying news that weighs more than they can comfortably hold. Rowan assembled the core team in the war room. Serafina, Marin, a massive warrior named Gren, who served as Rowan's second-in-command, and Sarah, the intelligence coordinator. Decker stood at the head of the table and delivered his report with the clipped efficiency of a professional. 2 nights ago, I observed a meeting at the old mill complex east of Blackwater Crossing. 6 individuals. 3 I identified as members of the Fenris rogue clan. 2 I could not identify. The 6th was a woman matching the description of Evelyn. The room went tight. "She left the palace," Serafina said. The implications cascaded through her mind. Evelyn never left the palace. She controlled everything from inside those walls using proxies, intermediaries, layers of separation. For her to physically travel to a clandestine meeting meant something had changed. The timeline had accelerated. Something was forcing her hand. "What did you observe?" Rowan asked. They met for approximately 2 hours. I could not get close enough for audio without risking detection. But I observed the exchange of 3 sealed document cases and what appeared to be a lockbox, heavy, required 2 people to carry it. At the conclusion of the meeting, one of the unidentified individuals produced a map, and they studied it together for approximately 20 minutes. The map was large. I could see general features from my position. It was a military map. Garrison positions, patrol routes, supply lines. The central area of focus was the Draven capital itself. Silence. "They are not planning a border raid," Gren said. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "They are planning an assault on the capital." "During the Winter Blood Assembly," Serafina said. The words came out of her mouth before she had finished thinking them, but she knew as soon as she heard them that she was right. The Winter Blood Assembly. The one night of the year when every major alpha, Every general, every noble house in the kingdom gathered in the same room. The throne hall would be packed. Security would be ceremonial rather than tactical, because no one had ever attacked the assembly in the kingdom's history. It was sacred ground, which made it the perfect target. If they hit the assembly, they take out the entire leadership structure in one strike, Rowan said. His voice was quiet. The quieter he got, the more dangerous the situation. Serafina had learned to read his volume like a gauge. Kael, his generals, the noble alphas, the council members, everyone. One night, one operation, and with Evelyn's people already in position inside the palace, the attackers would have inside access to security protocols, door codes, escape routes. When is the assembly? Decker asked. 18 days, Serafina said. The number hung in the air like the blade of a guillotine suspended at the top of its track. That is not enough time, Gren said. It has to be enough time, Rowan replied. He straightened. The shift in his posture was subtle, but it changed the energy of the entire room. He was not leaning anymore. He was standing at his full height, and the man who stood at his full height was not the patient strategist who spent his evenings studying maps and listening with his eyes closed. He was the alpha of the northern hold, and the wolf behind his eyes was very much awake. We need to get word to Kael, Sarah said. Kael will not listen. Serafina's voice was flat, hard, the voice of a woman who had tried to tell the truth inside those walls and been thrown into a blizzard for it. Any message we send will be intercepted by Evelyn's people before it reaches him, and even if it got through, he would dismiss it as a fabrication. The exiled Luna sending warnings from the north? He would call it a manipulation, a desperate attempt to claw my way back. Then we do not send a message, Rowan said. We go. Every pair of eyes in the room locked onto him. We take a force to the assembly, not an army, a strike team, small enough to move fast, large enough to fight if it comes to that. We get inside the throne hall and we put the evidence in front of every alpha in the kingdom at once, not in a letter, not through a proxy, face to face, in a room full of witnesses that Evelyn cannot silence. You are describing an invasion of the Draven capital, Gren said. I am describing a rescue mission for a kingdom that does not know it needs rescuing. Kael will see it as an act of war. A northern alpha marching armed wolves into the throne hall during the most politically sensitive event of the year. Even if you are right about everything, the optics alone could trigger a civil war. The civil war is already happening. It is just happening quietly. Evelyn has been fighting it for 2 years, and she is winning because nobody on the other side knows they are in a fight. Rowan looked at Serafina. Except you. She met his eyes. The green ice, the scar. The absolute, unshakable steadiness that she had come to rely on the way a climber relies on the rope. If I walk into that throne hall, Kael's law says I can be killed on sight. Then we make sure you are not on sight until the moment it matters most. And the child? The question silenced the room. Marin shifted in her seat. Gren looked at the floor. Sarah studied a knot in the wooden table with sudden intense interest. Rowan did not flinch. The child is the reason you have to do this, not in spite of the risk, because of it. If Evelyn's operation succeeds, if the assembly falls and the kingdom collapses, there is no safe place left. Not here, not anywhere. The northern hold survives because the balance of power on this continent keeps the rogue clans fragmented and the major kingdoms intact. Remove the keystone and the whole structure comes down, and your child grows up in a world where the strongest predator wins and everyone else serves or dies. Serafina's hand moved to her stomach. She could feel the heartbeat there, faint and fast and relentless. She thought about the Draven court, the throne hall with its iron chair and its guttering torches, and the 200 wolves who had watched her walk to her death without raising a hand. She thought about Kael's face when he read the forged letter, the way he had looked at her and seen a stranger, the way the bond had screamed between them and he had simply turned down the volume. She thought about Evelyn standing in the colonnade, white fur and dark eyes, and a smile like a knife drawn slowly across silk. And she thought about the child, the heartbeat that refused to stop, the life that had survived the storm and the cold and the betrayal and the grief, clinging to existence inside a body that the world had tried very hard to destroy. Something crystallized in her chest. Not rage, not grief. something colder and more durable than either. The absolute marrow-deep understanding that she would not run, she would not hide, she would not spend the rest of her life in the northern mountains building a quiet existence while the kingdom burned and the wolves who had needed her protection were slaughtered by the woman who had stolen her name. She had been a Luna, stripped of title, exiled, left for dead. But the thing about a Luna is that the title does not make the wolf. The wolf makes the title. And the wolf inside Serafina Vale had been starving in a cage of politeness and protocol for years, and the cage was gone now, broken open by the same storm that was supposed to kill her, and what was stepping out of the wreckage was something the Draven court had never seen. "I will do it," she said, "but we do it my way." Rowan raised an eyebrow, the first expression she had ever seen him make that could be classified as surprised. "Your way. Evelyn expects a military threat. She has been preparing for it. Armed wolves, border incursions, direct confrontation. She has countermeasures in place for all of it. What she does not have a countermeasure for is the truth delivered by the woman she tried to bury, standing in the one room where every power broker on the continent can hear it. She is expecting a sword. I'm going to be a mirror. I'm going to walk into that hall, and I'm going to show every wolf in that kingdom exactly what she is, and I'm going to do it with evidence she does not know exists because she thinks she destroyed it all." "What evidence?" Serafina looked at Sarah. "The coded message. The one that carried my forged seal." Evelyn said every thread was handled, every witness dealt with, but she made one mistake. She used real intelligence in the forgery, actual troop positions, actual patrol rotations. That information was classified at the highest level. Only 4 people in the kingdom had access to it: Kael, General Thorn, the head of the Cipher Council, and the person who sat in on every classified security briefing for the last 8 months as Kael's personal advisor. "Evelyn," Rowan said, "the message proves its own forgery. The intelligence it contains could only have come from someone with direct access to Kael's war room. I did not have that access. I was Luna. I attended court functions and diplomatic events. I was never briefed on operational military details because Kael kept that compartmented. Evelyn was. And if we can obtain a copy of the original message and present it alongside the access logs from the war room, the math does the rest." The access logs. Every entry to the classified briefing room is recorded by the palace guard. Names, times, dates. Those logs are maintained by General Thorn's office, not Evelyn's oversight council. She may not even know they exist in a separate archive. Rowan was very still, thinking. She could almost see the scenarios running behind his eyes, branching and converging. The tactical mind working through possibilities the way hers worked through intelligence patterns. "Thorn," he said, "you think he is still loyal. I think when I walked out of that throne hall, he squeezed his sword. I think he wanted to stop it and could not figure out how. I think he has been watching Evelyn dismantle his command structure for months, and he is furious and frightened and looking for a door. I think if we give him a door, he will walk through it." That is a lot of assumptions about a man who watched you get banished and did nothing. It is. But I knew Thorn for 8 months. I watched him operate. He is not a coward. He is a soldier who understands chain of command, and his chain of command told him to stand down. If we can show him that the chain of command has been compromised, he will not stand down again. "How do we reach him?" Serafina smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the expression of a woman who had spent 17 days mapping every crack in the fortress that had expelled her and had found the one crack that went all the way through. "We do not reach him. He reaches us." Every month, Thorn sends a personal courier to his sister's family in the Midlands. Not military correspondence, personal letters. It is the one communication channel he maintains outside palace security, and Evelyn does not monitor it because she does not consider personal mail a threat. "You want to intercept a general's personal courier? I want to include a message in the courier's packet that only Thorn will understand. Something specific enough to prove it comes from me and vague enough to be meaningless if anyone else reads it." And what happens when Thorn gets this message? He gets angry. Then he gets careful. Then he does what soldiers do when they realize the enemy is inside the wire. He fights. Quietly. Precisely. And on the night of the Winter Blood Assembly, he makes sure those access logs survive long enough for me to put them in front of the entire kingdom. The room was silent for a long time. Rowan looked at Gren. Gren looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Marin. Marin looked at Seraphina with an expression that could have been admiration or could have been the particular exasperation of a healer who has just realized her patient is going to do something monumentally dangerous, and there is absolutely nothing she can do to stop it. "You are 12 weeks pregnant," Marin said. "I am aware. You are proposing to infiltrate a hostile capital, confront the woman who tried to have you killed, and reveal yourself in front of the most powerful wolves on the continent. While 12 weeks pregnant. 13 by the time we get there." Marin closed her eyes, opened them. "I am coming with you." "Marin, that is not a request. If you're going to do something this reckless with my patient inside your body, I'm going to be close enough to intervene when everything inevitably goes sideways." End of discussion. Rowan straightened. He looked around the room at each face. Gren, who was already calculating logistics. Sarah, who was mentally mapping courier routes. Marin, who was compiling a medical kit in her head. And Seraphina, who was standing at the center of it all with her hand on her belly and fire in her eyes, and the calm, terrifying certainty of a woman who has lost everything and discovered that the thing standing in the ruins is stronger than anything the building ever contained. 18 days, Rowan said. Gren, I need a team. 12 wolves. Our best. Combat capable but disciplined enough to hold position until the signal. No hotheads, no glory seekers. People who can sit still in the dark and wait. Done. Sarah, I need everything you have on the palace layout. Entry points, service tunnels, guard rotations during the assembly. Pull every source we have in the Midlands and burn favors if you have to. Already working on it. Marin, supply list. Medical kit for field conditions, and whatever Seraphina needs for the pregnancy. No compromises. Obviously, Rowan turned to Seraphina last. They stood across the table from each other, the map of the Draven Kingdom spread between them like the body of a patient on an operating table. His eyes found hers and held. You understand what happens if this fails. We die. Worse than that. If we fail, Evelyn uses our attack as proof that the Northern Territories are hostile. She gets the war she has been engineering, fought on her terms, with her people in position. And every wolf in the Draven Kingdom who might have stood against her rallies to the crown instead, because that is what wolves do when they think they are under attack. They stop asking questions and start following orders. Then we do not fail. He held her gaze for 3 more seconds, then he nodded once. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning the thing that is either going to save this kingdom or end us all. The room cleared, boots on stone, the creak of the heavy door, the muffled sounds of people moving with purpose toward something they could not turn back from. Seraphina stood alone in the war room. The fire had burned down to embers, and the maps on the table were half lit, half shadowed, the Draven Kingdom existing in that uncertain space between visible and hidden. She put her hands flat on the table and leaned forward, felt her weight settle into her palms, felt the child shift inside her, restless, responsive to the adrenaline still flooding her system. 18 days, she whispered. 18 days until she walked back into the hall where she had been destroyed. 18 days until she looked Kyle Draven in the eyes again, and this time she would not be looking up at him from the base of his throne. This time she would be standing in front of him with the truth in one hand and the proof in the other, and he would have to choose. Believe the lie that had kept him warm all winter, or face the woman he had exiled and accept that everything he thought he knew was a construction built by someone who wanted him blind. 18 days. And somewhere between here and there, moving through the frozen dark with flat eyes and a hatchet face and orders to kill, Kale was hunting. He had picked up her scent at the ridge crossing. 3 weeks old, but still there, preserved by the cold, trapped in the ice crystals like a voice caught in glass. He followed it north with the patient, mechanical efficiency of something that did not tire, did not doubt, did not stop. He was 9 days out from Ironhold, and he was not alone. Kale moved through the northern forest like a disease moves through a bloodstream. Quiet. Systemic. By the time you noticed him, the damage was already done. He had crossed the ridge 4 days ago with 6 wolves at his back. Not a pack, a toolkit. Each one selected for a specific function the way a surgeon selects instruments before cutting. Breck, a tracker with a nose so refined he could separate individual scent signatures from a 2-week-old trail. Voss and Hale, twins who fought like a single organism split across 2 bodies. Asha, a small female wolf who could pass through security perimeters the way water passes through a crack in a dam. Torin, demolitions and field interrogation, a man whose hands were always steady regardless of what they were doing. And Lyndon, communications, the one who would send the signal back to Evelyn when the job was finished. They traveled at night, slept in snow caves during the day, body heat sealed inside by packed ice walls, invisible from more than 10 feet. Cale did not speak to his team unless operational necessity demanded it. They did not speak to each other. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was professional. The silence of people who had worked together in dark places long enough to communicate through gesture, glance, and the particular way a body shifts its weight when something in the environment has changed. On the 5th night north of the ridge, Breck stopped moving. He was 20 yards ahead of the group, threading through a stand of black spruce trees that grew so close together the branches interlocked overhead like fingers. He crouched, pressed his hand flat against the snow, held it there for a long time. Kael was beside him in seconds. No words. Breck pointed down. In the shallow depression between 2 root systems, partially filled with fresh snowfall, there was an impression. A boot print. Small. Female. Recent enough that the edges had not yet softened. Breck held up 3 fingers. 3 hours old. Cale stared at the print. Then he raised his head and looked north through the trees. The terrain climbed steeply here, angling toward a granite ridgeline that ran east to west like a wall. On the other side of that ridge, according to every piece of intelligence Evelyn's network had gathered, was Rowan Blackthorn's compound. "She is walking the perimeter," Breck whispered. "Regular patrol route. I can see where the snow has been compressed by repeated passes. Same path, same interval. How many on the patrol?" 2 sets of prints. The small ones are hers. The larger set belongs to someone heavy, 220 pounds minimum. Cale processed. A Luna, banished and pregnant, walking patrol routes on a fortified compound, not hiding, not cowering, functioning as part of a military operation. Evelyn had underestimated what the storm would leave behind and what the northern pack would do with it. "We do not engage on the perimeter," Cale said, "too close to the compound. If she gets a signal off, we are fighting Blackthorn's entire force in terrain they know and we do not." Intercept point? Cale studied the terrain in his mind. The map he had memorized before leaving the Draven Palace was military grade, satellite verified, accurate to within 3 meters. The compound sat in a natural bowl surrounded by ridgelines on 3 sides. 1 primary approach from the south, heavily monitored. 2 secondary approaches from the east and west, narrow defiles that could be sealed with a handful of fighters. And 1 feature the map showed as a geographic curiosity rather than a tactical asset. A river gorge to the north, frozen solid this time of year, that ran beneath the compound's back wall like a vein running under skin. "The gorge," Cale said. "Asha goes in through the gorge, alone, identifies the target's sleeping quarters, marks the entry point. We breach after the midnight patrol rotation when the compound is at minimum readiness." Asha materialized from the dark behind them. She had heard everything. She always heard everything. Her eyes were flat and brown and utterly devoid of the normal social signals that make a face readable. She nodded once and vanished into the trees, heading north toward the gorge with the fluid, boneless movement of something that had evolved specifically to get into places it was not supposed to be. They waited. Inside the compound, Serafina could not sleep. It was not the pregnancy keeping her awake this time. The nausea had subsided 2 days ago, replaced by a persistent, low-grade hunger that Marin said was normal, and Serafina experienced as her body making increasingly unreasonable demands at increasingly inconvenient hours. She had eaten. She had trained. She had spent 4 hours with Sarah reviewing the final intelligence package on the assembly's security layout. Her body was exhausted. Her mind would not stop. She lay on the narrow cot in the room Rowan had given her, staring at the timber ceiling, feeling the child shift and settle inside her like a passenger adjusting position for a long journey. 14 weeks now. The danger window was closing. Marin said the heartbeat was strong. The growth was on track. Whatever damage the storm and the hypothermia had inflicted, The child had weathered it with a resilience that Serafina found both comforting and terrifying, because it meant the baby had inherited something from its father. That iron refusal to break, even when breaking was the rational response. She thought about Kael. She did not want to. She had built careful walls around that part of her mind, bricked them up with anger and purpose, and the daily discipline of forward motion. But at night, lying still, the mortar between the bricks softened, and things leaked through. His hands. The way they could hold a sword and a wineglass with the same precise, controlled grip. His voice in the dark, stripped of authority, reduced to the raw frequency of a man telling a woman something he had never told anyone else. His fear of his own father's legacy. The way he checked the locks on the bedroom door twice every night, not because he was afraid of intruders, but because the habit had been beaten into him as a child, and he could not stop even though the old man had been dead for 7 years. She had loved the broken parts of him most. That was the cruelest joke. The very wounds that made him human were the same cracks Evelyn had used to get inside. A man afraid of being weak will do almost anything to avoid looking foolish, and a woman smart enough to frame the truth as foolishness and the lie as strength could steer him like a ship. She pressed her palms against her eyes, hard enough to see sparks. "Stop," she told herself. Not gently. The way Rowan gave commands, short and final. He is not your problem anymore. But the bond disagreed. The bond was a living wire strung between her chest and a point 500 miles south, and it hummed constantly, low and persistent, like a power line in the rain. She could not cut it. She had tried. In the early days at Ironhold, she had reached inside herself and grabbed the bond with both hands and pulled, trying to rip it free the way you rip a weed out by the roots. It had not moved. It had simply vibrated harder, and the pain had been so profound that Maren found her on the floor of her room, curled around her stomach, unable to speak. The bond did not care about justice, did not care about betrayal, did not care that the man on the other end had condemned her to death on forged evidence. The bond only knew one thing, mine. An animal certainty that predated language and logic and the entire complicated architecture of civilization. He is mine, and I am his, and nothing that happens between us changes the molecular fact of that belonging. Serafina hated it. Some nights she hated it more than she hated Evelyn, because at least Evelyn was an enemy she could fight. The bond was an enemy that lived inside her own chest and wore her own heartbeat as camouflage. She rolled onto her side, closed her eyes, counted her breaths the way Maren had taught her. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The child shifted again, pressing against her left side, and she curved her body around the pressure instinctively. She was almost asleep when she heard it, a sound that did not belong, not loud, not dramatic, just wrong, the way a single off-key note in a familiar song registers in the body before the mind identifies it. A scrape, metal against stone, faint, coming from the wall behind her head. Serafina's eyes opened. Her breathing did not change. She did not move. Every muscle in her body went from relaxed to locked in the space between one heartbeat and the next, and she lay absolutely still, listening with the predatory focus of an animal that has just detected a threat in its den. Another sound. The soft displacement of air that means a gap has opened where there was not a gap before. A draft touched the back of her neck. Cold. Carrying the scent of ice and river stone and something else, something chemical, sharp. The smell of a blade recently oiled. She moved, not away from the threat, into it. She rolled off the cot toward the wall, driving her elbow backward as she turned and felt it connect with something solid. A body. Close. Already inside the room. Her elbow caught what felt like a rib cage, and she heard a sharp intake of breath that was immediately controlled, swallowed, silenced with a discipline that told her everything she needed to know about what she was dealing with. This was not a random intruder. This was a professional. The professional recovered fast. A hand closed around Serafina's wrist. Small, strong, female. The grip rotated her arm into a lock that sent electric pain from her elbow to her shoulder, and a second hand came up holding something that caught the faint glow of the banked fire. A needle. Thin. Glass barrel filled with clear liquid. Serafina did not think. Thinking was too slow. Her body thought for her. She dropped her weight, collapsing straight down, and the sudden change in angle broke the wrist lock. She hit the floor on her hip, grabbed the leg of the cot, and wrenched it sideways. The heavy wooden frame swung into the intruder's knees. The woman stumbled. The needle clattered against the stone floor. Serafina screamed. Not a scream of fear, a battle cry. A sound designed to carry through stone walls and shake awake every wolf in the compound. It tore out of her throat with a force that surprised even her, raw and enormous, and full of a rage that had been building for weeks with nowhere to go. The intruder was already moving, fast, inhumanly fast. She abandoned the needle and went for the opening in the wall, a section of the stone that had been displaced to reveal a passage behind it. The gorge. The frozen river gorge that ran under the compound. Serafina lunged. Her hand caught the intruder's ankle as the woman dove for the passage. Fingers closed, held. The woman kicked back, heel connecting with Serafina's forearm, and the pain was bright and immediate. And Serafina did not let go because letting go meant the intruder vanished into the dark and came back another night. And there would not be another night because next time she might not wake up in time. The door burst open. Rowan filled the frame, shirtless, a short blade in each hand, eyes wild with the particular focus of a man pulled from sleep by a sound that his hindbrain had classified as mortal danger before his conscious mind had finished forming the word. He took in the scene in less than a second. Serafina on the floor. The intruder half inside the wall passage, the needle on the ground. He moved. 3 strides. His hand closed around the intruder's jacket, and he hauled her backward out of the passage with a force that lifted her off the ground entirely. She twisted in the air, producing a second blade from somewhere inside her clothing, and Rowan caught the striking arm at the wrist and squeezed until the bones shifted and the blade fell. Then he slammed her against the wall and held her there, one hand on her throat, his face inches from hers. "Who sent you?" The woman, Asha, though they did not know her name yet, said nothing. Her flat brown eyes stared at Rowan with the blank professional indifference of someone who had been caught before and knew that what happened next was simply a cost of doing business. "Who sent you?" Nothing. Gren arrived. Then Marin. Then 3 more warriors armed, filling the corridor outside Serafina's room with the controlled chaos of a military compound responding to a breach. Marin pushed past all of them, knelt beside Serafina, and began checking her with hands that were steady, even though her face was the color of old parchment. "Are you hurt?" "Forearm. She kicked me. It is not broken." "The baby?" "I do not know." I landed on my hip. Marin's hands moved to Serafina's belly, pressed, felt, listened with that supernatural stillness that healers developed after years of reading bodies, the way other people read books. The room held its breath. "Heartbeat is there," Marin said. "Fast but steady. You need to lie still." "I need to talk to her." "You need to lie still." Serafina looked at Rowan. He had the intruder pinned to the wall, and his warriors had secured her arms behind her back with leather bindings. The woman hung in Rowan's grip like a tool that had been put down mid-use, waiting, patient, giving nothing. "Bring her to the war room," Serafina said. "Serafina," Marin started. "Marin, someone crawled through the walls of this compound to put a needle in me while I slept. That needle was not filled with sedative. Nobody sends an assassin to put you to sleep. She was here to kill me, or to kill the child, or both, and I need to know who sent her and how she got in and whether there are more of them outside those walls waiting for a signal. I will lie still after that. Not before." Marin stared at her. The healer's jaw worked. Then she stood and pointed at Gren. "Carry her. She does not walk." Gren looked at Serafina. Serafina looked at Gren. The massive warrior shrugged apologetically, scooped her off the floor like she was made of paper, and carried her down the corridor to the war room with Marin following 3 steps behind, cataloging injuries and radiating disapproval like a furnace radiates heat. They put Asha in a chair, tied her to it. Rowan stood in front of her. Serafina sat at the table, wrapped in a fur, Marin at her side monitoring her pulse with 2 fingers on her wrist like a metronome keeping time. "Name," Rowan said. Silence. "Name." The woman looked at him, looked through him. Her breathing was even. Her heart rate, which Rowan could hear, was barely elevated. She had been trained for this. Her body had been conditioned to treat capture as a neutral event, neither threatening nor interesting. Just a situation to be managed. "There is a needle on the floor of the room you broke into," Serafina said. Her voice was quiet. Not calm, controlled. There is a difference, and everyone in the room could feel it. My healer is going to analyze the contents. If it is a paralytic, that tells me one thing. If it is a cardiac agent, that tells me another. Either way, you were sent to kill me. And the number of people on this continent who would send a professional assassin through a frozen river gorge to eliminate a pregnant exile in the middle of the night is very small. Asha's eyes moved to Serafina for the first time. They rested on her belly. A flicker of something crossed the flat brown surface. Not guilt, not compassion, calculation. The professional acknowledgement that the variable she had been briefed on, the pregnancy, was visible and real and changed the weight of every outcome. You know about the child, Serafina said, which means whoever sent you knows, which means Evelyn knows. Asha's left eyelid twitched. Microscopic, involuntary, the body's smallest possible admission that a name has landed somewhere sensitive. Evelyn sent you. She found out about the pregnancy from the palace medical records, and she sent you to end it, not me, the child. Because a dead exile is a footnote. A living heir to the Draven throne is an extinction-level threat to everything she has built. Serafina leaned forward. Marin's fingers tightened on her wrist in warning. She ignored it. How many are outside? And do not tell me you came alone. Evelyn does not send a single operative on a mission this critical. She sends a team. Where are they? Asha stared at her. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then the woman spoke for the first time. Her voice was flat, regional accent, Southern Territories. 6. In the trees south of the ridge, waiting for my signal. What signal? Lantern in the gorge mouth. 2 flashes for confirmed kill. 1 flash for extraction needed. And if no signal comes, they breach at dawn. The room went cold, not metaphorically. The temperature seemed to drop as the implications settled over every person present. 6 trained operatives outside the walls, expecting either a signal or a dawn assault window, approximately 4 hours away. Rowan was already moving. He grabbed Gren by the shoulder and spoke in a voice that carried the compressed urgency of a man who has just realized the timer he thought had days left on it actually has hours. Full alert. Every fighter on the wall. I want eyes on the southern ridge and both D-files. Nobody goes in or out until I say otherwise. Gren was gone before the last word landed. The compound erupted, boots on stone, voices in the dark, the clank of weapons being distributed, torches flaring along the walls. Rowan turned back to Asha. You're going to tell me everything about the team outside. Positions, weapons, communication protocols, fallback plans. Why would I do that? Because in about 3.5 hours, my wolves are going to go out there and deal with your team one way or another. The question is whether that happens with intelligence that minimizes casualties on both sides, or whether it happens blind, in which case my people will default to lethal force because they will not have the luxury of precision. Your team dies either way. The variable is how many of mine go with them. Asha looked at him, then at Serafina, then back at Rowan. You are assuming I care about my team. I am assuming you care about yourself. And right now, your survival depends on being more useful alive than dead. Another silence. Shorter this time. The professional was doing math, running outcomes, weighing the value of loyalty to an employer who was 500 miles away against the immediate tangible reality of a very large, very angry alpha standing close enough to break her neck with a casual twist. South Ridge, 200 meters apart. Overlapping sightlines on the main approach. They have crossbows with poisoned bolts and enough provisions for 3 days. The fallback is the old mine shaft 2 clicks east. If they do not hear from me by dawn plus 2 hours, they abandon the mission and report back to Evelyn that the compound is fortified beyond the original assessment. Who leads them? Kale. Rowan's face changed. It was a subtle shift, a tightening around the eyes, a hardening of the jaw. But Serafina had spent enough time reading him to know what it meant. He recognized the name, and he did not like what he recognized. Kale is here. He tracked her from the ridge crossing. He does not stop. He does not fail. He has never failed. Rowan looked at Serafina. The green eyes were dark. The scar on his face stood out white against skin that had flushed with adrenaline. Kale is not a regular operative. He is Evelyn's personal weapon, former military, dishonorably discharged from the Southern Guard for conduct that even they found excessive, and their threshold for excessive is considerably higher than most. He has been linked to at least 11 targeted killings across 4 territories in the last 3 years. No convictions, no witnesses, bodies found weeks later if they are found at all. Serafina absorbed this. The assassin in the chair, Asha, had been the infiltration specialist, the scalpel. Kale was something else, the hammer that came down when the scalpel was not enough. He knows the gorge entrance now, Serafina said. Asha mapped it for him. Standard protocol, Asha confirmed. I marked the entry. Kale decides whether to use it. Will he? Asha looked at her with something that might have been the distant ancestor of respect. He's already inside your perimeter. You just do not know where. The words detonated in the room. Rowan spun toward the door. Marin pulled Serafina backward. 2 warriors drew blades. The war room, which had felt like a command center 30 seconds ago, suddenly felt like a box with the lid closing. Explain, Rowan said. His voice had dropped to the register Serafina had never heard before. Below quiet. Below calm. The frequency a wolf uses right before the killing bite. I am the entry team. Kale is the shadow. While you were focused on me, on this room, on the interrogation, he has been moving. That is how he works. The infiltration is the distraction. The real threat is the one you are not looking at. Serafina's hand went to her stomach. The baby kicked, hard, as though even the child could feel the ground shifting beneath them. Where? Serafina demanded. Where would he go? He does not go where you expect. He goes where you need. Where is the one place in this compound that you cannot afford to lose? The answer came to Serafina like a punch to the sternum. Not her room, not her body. Kale was not here for a simple assassination anymore. Asha's capture had changed the calculus. A dead Luna was useful, but there was something more useful. The war room, Serafina whispered. The intelligence. He is after the evidence we have been gathering against Evelyn. Rowan's eyes went to the table. The maps, the documents, Sarah's carefully assembled dossiers. 3 weeks of intelligence work, laid out in organized stacks, every piece of thread in the tapestry they were building to present at the Winter Blood Assembly. Without it, they had nothing. Without it, Serafina was just a banished Luna making accusations she could not prove, and the Assembly would dismiss her as a bitter, broken woman grasping at conspiracy theories to explain her own fall. Everything they had was in this room, and they had left it unguarded to respond to the breach. Rowan moved first. He hit the door at a dead run, blade in hand, and the 2 warriors followed. Serafina stood, shrugging off Marin's restraining hand, and went after them because there was nothing in this world that could keep her in that chair, while the evidence that was supposed to save a kingdom burned. The corridor was dark. The torches had been pulled for the wall defense. Serafina's eyes adjusted fast, the wolf in her sharpening her vision to grayscale detail, and she saw Rowan ahead of her, moving fast, turning the corner toward the secondary war room where Sarah kept the backup copies of every document. She smelled it before she saw it. Smoke. Not wood smoke. Chemical. The acrid, throat-closing burn of a compound designed to destroy paper fast and completely. Rowan hit the secondary war room door with his shoulder. It flew open. Inside, a figure was crouched over the document chests, and the contents were already burning. White phosphorus. The flames were blue-white, impossibly bright, consuming paper with a veracity that was almost alive. The figure turned. Hatchet face. Deep-set eyes. Flat. Hungry. Kale. He was faster than a man his size had any right to be. He had already finished his work. The documents were beyond saving. The fire was spreading across the table, jumping to the wall maps, eating years of intelligence in seconds. Kale did not engage Rowan. He did not even try. He threw something on the floor, a clay sphere that shattered and released a cloud of thick, choking smoke, and in the 2 seconds it took Rowan to clear his eyes, Kale was through the window and into the compound yard and running for the gorge. Rowan vaulted through the window after him. Serafina heard the impact of bodies hitting snow. A snarl. The sound of a blade cutting air. Then shouting, multiple voices, warriors converging from the walls. She did not follow. She stood in the doorway of the burning room and watched the intelligence that was supposed to save the Draven kingdom turn to ash. 3 weeks of work. Sarah's network of informants burned. Decker's reconnaissance reports gone. The courier schedules, the access log analysis, the carefully documented pattern of Eveline's systematic dismantling of the kingdom's defenses. All of it feeding the phosphorus flames with the enthusiastic cooperation of physics. Marin appeared behind her, grabbed her shoulders, pulled her back from the heat. Seraphina did not resist. She stood in the corridor and watched the fire through the open door, and felt something inside her chest rearrange itself with a series of small, quiet snaps, like the sound of a spine realigning after being bent too far in one direction for too long. The evidence was gone. The plan was dead. 18 days to the assembly and they had nothing. No documents, no proof, no carefully assembled case to lay before the alphas of the continent. Evelyn's assassin had waltzed into the most secure compound in the Northern Territories and destroyed their entire operation in under 4 minutes, and he had done it while their best fighters were looking the other way. She had been building a legal case, a political argument, a reasonable, evidence-based appeal to the rational minds of wolves who governed by tradition and precedent, and it had been erased as easily as wiping chalk from a board. Rational, reasonable, evidence-based. The words tasted like dust in her mouth. Rowan came back 20 minutes later, blood on his face, a shallow cut across his forearm that he was ignoring with the casual disregard of a man who inventoried his injuries by threat level, and anything that did not require a tourniquet was filed under later. Gren was behind him, dragging something. Not Kale. One of Kale's team, caught trying to flee through the eastern defile. The man was unconscious and bleeding from the temple. "Kale?" Seraphina asked. "Gone. Hit the gorge and vanished. My wolves tracked him a mile downstream before the trail went dead. He had a vehicle stashed on the far bank. Snowmobile. Engine was still warm. The others? 3 down, 2 escaped with Kale. Asha is still in custody." Rowan looked at the burning room behind her. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared. She watched him absorb the loss the way a fighter absorbs a body shot, leaning into it, letting the force pass through, staying on his feet through sheer structural integrity. "All of it?" he asked. "All of it." Silence. Sarah arrived at a run, still pulling on her coat. She stopped when she saw the fire. Her face went blank, then white, then a shade of gray that Seraphina had never seen on a living person. "My sources," Sarah whispered. "The names, the contact protocols. If he copied anything before he burned it, if he has any of those names." "He did not copy," Seraphina said. "He burned." This was not intelligence gathering. This was denial. Evelyn does not want our evidence. She wants it to not exist. "Then she wins," Sarah said. The words came out flat, dead. Without the documentation, without the pattern analysis, without the access logs, we have nothing to present at the assembly. It is your word against hers, and she has spent 2 years building credibility while you have been exiled for treason. The fire was dying now. Phosphorus burns fast and total. What was left was ash. Fine, gray, weightless ash that drifted in the thermal currents and settled on every surface like snow. Seraphina looked at the ash, looked at it for a long time, and something happened inside her that she would later recognize as the moment the woman she had been finished dying, and the woman she was going to become, started breathing. She had been fighting this war as a Luna, as a diplomat, as a political animal trained to operate within systems of law and evidence and procedural legitimacy. She had been playing by rules that Evelyn had never acknowledged and never intended to follow. A woman who forges evidence, frames allies, funds enemy armies, and sends assassins to murder pregnant women in their sleep does not lose to paperwork. She does not lose to a well-organized dossier presented in a formal setting to an audience of reasonable people. She loses to something older, something the Draven court had trained out of Seraphina with years of etiquette lessons and diplomatic protocol and the constant, suffocating expectation that a Luna should be graceful above all things. Seraphina was done being graceful. "We go anyway," she said. Every head in the corridor turned. "We do not have evidence," Sarah said. "Then I become the evidence." Seraphina's voice was something none of them had heard before. Not angry, not desperate, hard, the sound of a material that has been subjected to so much pressure it has changed its crystalline structure. Evelyn's mistake was not burning the documents. Her mistake was letting me live. I am the evidence. I am the Luna she framed. I am the woman she sent into a storm to die. I am the mother of the Draven heir she tried to murder in the womb. Every scar on my body, every week I survived in exile, every day that child grew inside me while she sat on the throne she stole is testimony that no document can match and no fire can destroy. The assembly will demand proof. The assembly will demand a spectacle. That is what wolves understand. Not paperwork, not legal arguments, presence, power. The undeniable physical reality of a woman who was supposed to be dead standing alive in front of the wolves who let her be thrown away. She looked at Rowan. You said she expects a sword, that I should be a mirror. I was wrong to agree. A mirror only shows what is already there. I need to be something she has never seen. Something she has no defense against because she never imagined it could exist. What is that? Seraphina put her hand on her belly, felt the heartbeat, strong, fast, alive. A Luna with nothing left to lose. Rowan stared at her. The green eyes were unreadable. The scar pulled at the corner of his mouth. Around them, the compound was still in crisis mode. Warriors on the walls, the captured operative being dragged to a holding cell, the fire crew smothering the last of the phosphorus flames. But in the corridor, in the gray light of a winter dawn filtering through the narrow windows, there was a stillness that felt like the pause between the lightning and the thunder. 13 days, Rowan said. 13 days. No evidence, no documentation, no allies inside the palace except a general we have not contacted yet and a hope that he will act when the moment comes. Yes. And you want to walk into the most heavily guarded event in the Draven Kingdom, pregnant, exiled, legally condemned, with nothing but your voice and your body and the truth. Yes. Rowan was quiet for a long time. Then he did something Seraphina had never seen him do. He smiled. Not the ghost she had caught once at the corner of his mouth, a real smile. Brief and sharp and carrying an emotion she could not name. Something between admiration and recognition and the grim electric exhilaration of a man who has just realized the war he has been fighting from a distance is about to become personal. Then we do it different, he said. No strike team hiding in the shadows, no covert entry through service tunnels. If we are going to walk into the lion's mouth with nothing but the truth, then we walk in through the front door, in full view, with enough warriors at your back that even Kael Draven thinks twice before giving the kill order. That is an act of war. It is a statement of intent. There is a difference. An army at the gates is a threat. An alpha and his wolves escorting a pregnant Luna into the hall where she was condemned is a challenge, a political challenge. Under the old laws, any wolf with a grievance against the crown has the right to present their case at the assembly. It has not been invoked in 200 years, but it has never been repealed. The right of reckoning, Seraphina said. Evelyn cannot stop it without violating the foundational law of every pack on this continent, and if she tries, every alpha in that room will know she is hiding something. Seraphina felt the pieces shifting, not the careful, logical pieces of the plan that had just been destroyed, something raw, something that operated on instinct and gut knowledge and the particular clarity that comes when every option has been stripped away except the most dangerous one. She was going back, not with evidence, not with a legal argument, with her body, her scars, her child, and the truth spoken out loud in a room full of wolves who would have to choose, in that moment, whether to believe the woman standing in front of them or the lie they had been living inside. And Kael was running south with the knowledge that the northern compound's intelligence was ash, and its defenses had been breached, running south to Evelyn with a report that would make the woman in white fur smile her surgical smile and believe, for 13 more days, that she had won. Let her believe it. Let her smile. Seraphina looked at the ash still drifting through the open doorway of the ruined room. She breathed it in, tasted it, the destruction of everything she had built. And in the ruins, standing in the gray dust of her own demolished plans, she felt something she had not felt since the night Kael Draven stripped her name from her in front of 200 wolves. She felt free. 13 days burned down like a fuse. Seraphina spent them becoming something the Draven Kingdom had never produced. Not a Luna, not a diplomat, not the graceful figurehead the court had shaped her into with years of careful sanding until every sharp edge was smooth and every dangerous thought was polished into something presentable. She spent 13 days becoming a weapon that looked like a woman, and the forge was Rowan Blackthorn's war camp, and the heat was everything she had lost, and the hammer was every single morning she woke up and chose to keep moving toward the place that had tried to kill her. Rowan trained her differently now. Not combat technique, combat mentality. They walked the perimeter at dawn, her belly rounding visibly under the heavy fur coat, the child growing with an urgency that matched the shrinking calendar, and he talked to her about the mechanics of confrontation in a room full of predators. "You will have 30 seconds, he said on the 9th morning, breath clouding in the gray air, snow crunching under their boots. That is how long the shock holds. The moment you walk through those doors, every wolf in that hall freezes. They are expecting a ceremony. They are expecting Evelyn's coronation. They are not expecting a dead woman. You have 30 seconds of absolute silence before the room starts reacting, and what you do in those 30 seconds determines whether you walk out alive." "What do I do?" "You take the center of the room, not the edges, not the aisle, the center. You stand where every eye can see you and every ear can hear you, and you do not move. Moving is weakness. Moving says you are looking for safety, for an exit, for someone to protect you. You plant yourself in the middle of 200 wolves and you make them come to you. And if Kyle orders me killed, he will not. Not in the first 30 seconds. Killing a pregnant woman in front of the entire kingdom's leadership is a line even an alpha king cannot cross without losing half his support base on the spot. He will hesitate. That hesitation is your window. You are betting my life on a hesitation. I am betting your life on the fact that Cale Draven loved you once, and the part of him that loved you is not dead. It is buried. Evelyn buried it under layers of paranoia and manufactured evidence, and the particular shame a powerful man feels when he suspects he has been foolish. But buried is not dead. And when you stand in front of him with his child visible in your body and the truth in your mouth, something in him is going to crack. It may not be enough, but it will be something, and something is all we need to start. She did not answer. She walked beside him in silence, feeling the child press against her ribs, feeling the cold air scour her lungs, feeling the bond humming its endless, maddening song between her chest and a point beyond the southern mountains where a man who had broken her was about to discover what she had become in the breaking. On the 12th day, Sarah intercepted a coded transmission from the Midlands. Thorn had received the message. The one Seraphina had sent through his sister's courier route. A single line, written in a private shorthand that only Thorn and Seraphina shared, developed during long nights reviewing security protocols when neither of them could sleep. Thorn's response was 2 words. The hall. He would be there. He would act. That was all the message said, and it was enough. General Thorn did not waste words on promises he could not keep. On the 13th day, Rowan assembled his force. Not 12 wolves, 28. Every fighter in the northern hold who could travel fast and arrive combat-ready. He lined them up in the compound yard at dawn, armed and provisioned, breath rising in plumes that looked like the ghosts of the words nobody was saying. Gren stood at the head of the column. Marin had a pack slung across her shoulders that contained enough medical supplies for a field hospital and the specific grim preparedness of a healer who expected to use all of it. Sarah was staying behind to manage communications and coordinate with whatever remained of her informant network. Rowan stood in front of his wolves and said nothing for a long time. He looked at each face, not with the theatrical gravity of a leader performing inspiration, with the honest, direct attention of a man who was asking people to follow him into something that might kill all of them, and who owed them the respect of seeing them clearly before they went. "You know where we are going," he said. "You know what we are walking into. I am not going to dress it up. There is a good chance some of us do not come back. If anyone wants to stay, now is the time. No judgment, no consequence." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was not obedience. It was choice. 28 wolves choosing, individually and without coercion, to follow a pregnant woman and a scarred alpha into the heart of a kingdom that would see their presence as an act of war. They moved south. 3 days of forced march through frozen terrain. Seraphina kept pace. Marin walked beside her, monitoring, adjusting her water intake, checking her pulse at rest stops with a focus that bordered on obsessive. The child was active, kicking, turning. Serafina could feel it responding to the adrenaline in her blood, to the relentless forward motion, to the biochemical reality that its mother was walking toward danger, and every cell in her body knew it. On the second night, camped in a shallow cave system that Rowan's scouts had pre-selected, Serafina sat apart from the group and watched the fire. Rowan found her there. He sat down beside her without asking permission, the way he did everything. Present, unapologetic, taking up exactly as much space as he occupied and no more. "You are thinking about him," Rowan said. "I'm thinking about what I'm going to say. That is the same thing." She almost smiled. "Maybe. You do not have to forgive him." "I know. I mean it. Whatever happens in that hall, whatever cracks open when he sees you, you do not owe him absolution. You do not owe him understanding. You do not owe him a single thing except the truth. And the truth is not a gift. It is a weapon you are choosing to use because it serves your purpose." She looked at him. The firelight turned his scar into a line of molten copper. "And what is my purpose? Survival, the child, the kingdom." In that order. "You left something off the list." "What?" "Justice." He shook his head. "Justice is what people call revenge when they want it to sound noble. You are not going to that hall for justice. You are going because a woman tried to erase you from existence and you refuse to be erased. That is not justice. That is war. And in war, the only thing that matters is who is still standing when the dust clears." She did not answer. She watched the fire eat the wood and thought about what it meant to be a person who had been dismantled and rebuilt in a different configuration. The Serafina who had stood at the base of Kael's throne and said that is a lie had been operating from a position of assumed legitimacy. She had believed in the system, believed that truth, clearly stated, would be recognized and honored. That woman had been thrown into a blizzard and nearly died. The Serafina who was going to walk into the Winter Blood Assembly was not that woman. This version did not assume anything, did not trust systems, did not believe that truth had inherent power. Truth was inert, a rock sitting on the ground. Power came from the hand that picked it up and the arm that threw it, and the willingness to aim for the place where it would do the most damage. She was done trusting the world to be fair. She was going to make it listen. They crossed the Draven border on the evening of the third day. No alarms, no patrols. The border garrison that should have intercepted a force of 28 armed wolves crossing into sovereign territory was operating at half strength, its commanding officer one of Evelyn's replacements, a man more interested in filing paperwork that pleased his new masters than in actually monitoring the perimeter. They slipped through like water through a broken levee. The Draven capital sat in a valley between two mountain ranges, and from the northern ridge, Serafina could see it for the first time in almost 2 months. The palace dominated the skyline. Dark stone, iron spires, lit from within by 1,000 torches that made it glow against the winter sky like a coal that refused to go out. She stopped. Rowan stopped beside her. "Last chance," he said. "There is no last chance. There is only forward." He nodded. They descended. The Winterblood Assembly began at sundown. Tradition dictated that every noble house, every alpha of consequence, every general and advisor and political power broker in the Draven Kingdom gather in the Great Throne Hall for the single most important political event of the year. Treaties were renewed, disputes were settled. The strength of the crown was reaffirmed through ceremony and the visible, physical presence of every wolf who mattered. This year, the ceremony had an addition. Evelyn's coronation as the official consort of the Alpha King, not Luna. Kael had been careful about that distinction, or Evelyn had been careful to make him think it was his idea. Consort carried fewer formal powers than Luna, but occupied the same symbolic space. The woman beside the king, the face of the crown. The message was clear. Serafina Vale was gone. The throne had a new partner. The hall was packed, every seat filled. The crowd was a spectrum of power, from the ancient alpha families in the front rows to the minor nobles and military officers ranked behind them to the common wolves who packed the standing galleries along the walls. 230 wolves by Rowan's count, which Gren had confirmed through a scout who had slipped into the palace servants' quarters 3 hours earlier. Kael sat on the Iron Throne. He was dressed in formal black, the Draven crown on his head. A circle of black iron that looked more like a shackle than an ornament. His face was the same. The jaw, the eyes, the controlled power that pressed against the air around him. But Seraphina, watching from the shadows of the northern corridor, where Rowan's force was positioned, saw the differences. The new lines at the corners of his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that had not been there before. The way his gaze swept the room without settling, restless, searching for something it could not find. He looked diminished. Not physically. Something else. Something internal. As though a vital component had been removed and the machine was still running but producing a fraction of its former output. The bond registered it, sent it down the wire between them like a telegraph signal. He is incomplete. He is breaking. He does not know why. Evelyn stood to his right. White gown, silver circlet on her dark hair. Radiant in the way that only someone operating at peak performance can be radiant. She looked like a queen. She looked like she had been born for that spot. And in a way she had been, because Evelyn had spent her entire life training to stand beside power and redirect it, and this was the culmination of every skill she had ever developed. The ceremony began. An elder from the council stood before the throne and began reciting the formal words of investiture. Ancient language, pack law, the binding of consort to crown. Evelyn's face was serene. Her hands were folded, her breathing was slow and even. She was savoring this the way a craftsman savors the completion of a complex piece. Every joint fitted, every surface polished, the masterwork complete. General Thorne stood against the eastern wall, arms crossed, face stone. His position was deliberate, close enough to the side door that led to the guard barracks, close enough to intervene if intervention became necessary. His eyes moved once toward the northern corridor, a flicker, then back. He knew. Seraphina stood in the dark of the corridor and felt her heartbeat in her temples, her throat, her wrists, the soles of her feet. The child was still. For the first time in days, perfectly still, as though even the baby understood that what was about to happen required absolute focus. Rowan was beside her, 28 wolves behind her, arranged in a column, armed but with weapons sheathed. This was not going to work if it looked like an invasion. It had to look like what it was, a reckoning. "Now?" Rowan whispered. The elder's voice echoed through the hall. The ceremonial words were approaching the binding phrase, the moment when Evelyn would be named consort before every power in the kingdom. "Wait," Seraphina said. She listened, counted the phrases. She had attended 3 investiture ceremonies during her time as Luna. She knew the cadence, knew the rhythm, knew exactly which words preceded the binding. The elder's voice rose. The penultimate phrase hung in the air. Now. Rowan moved. He did not sneak, did not creep. He walked through the northern corridor and through the archway into the great throne hall with the measured, deliberate stride of a man entering a room he had every right to be in. His 28 wolves followed in formation, disciplined, silent. A river of armed northern wolves flowing into the hall with the unstoppable calm of a natural force. The elder stopped speaking. His mouth stayed open, the binding phrase dying unfinished on his lips. Heads turned. 230 wolves pivoting toward the northern archway, and the collective intake of breath was a sound Seraphina felt in her sternum, a vacuum of shock sucking the air from the room. Rowan stepped aside. Seraphina walked through. She had dressed for this. Not in armor, not in finery, in a simple dark dress that did nothing to hide her belly. 15 weeks now, and the pregnancy was visible, unmistakable. She wore no crown, no jewels, no symbol of office. She wore the truth of what had happened to her, written in the lines of her face and the swell of her body and the straight-backed, unbreakable posture of a woman walking into the place that had tried to destroy her. She walked to the center of the hall. The crowd parted. Not voluntarily this time. Compelled by something older than manners, the same force that makes a clearing in the woods when a predator enters. She planted herself on the stone floor, equidistant from the throne and the main doors, exactly where Rowan had told her to stand. Center, visible, immovable. 30 seconds. She counted them in heartbeats. The silence was absolute. Every face in the room was turned toward her. She could see the recognition rippling through the crowd like a stone dropped into still water. The Luna. The banished Luna. Alive. pregnant. Standing in the throne hall with a northern army at her back and an expression on her face that was not grief, not rage, not desperation, but the cold, settled certainty of someone who has already accepted every possible outcome and found them all acceptable. Kael was on his feet. She had not seen him stand. He was simply upright, and the throne behind him was empty, and his face was the face of a man who has just seen a ghost. Not the poetic kind, the real kind. The kind that makes the blood leave your extremities and your vision narrow to a tunnel and every higher cognitive function shut down in favor of the single, primal recognition that something you believe to be true is catastrophically wrong. He was staring at her belly. The bond between them detonated. Not a hum, not a signal, an explosion. Serafina felt it hit her like a physical force, a wave of raw, unfiltered emotion pouring through the connection from his end. Shock, horror, recognition. And underneath all of it, buried so deep he probably did not even know it was there, a grief so vast and so total it could have swallowed the room. He had not known about the child, about any of it. He was finding out right now in front of 230 witnesses, and the truth was doing to him exactly what Serafina had known it would do. It was breaking him open. Eveline moved first. Her serenity cracked. Not shattered, cracked. A fine line running through the porcelain, visible only to someone who knew where to look. Her hand went to Kael's arm. A gesture that looked supportive. Was actually controlling, redirecting, pulling his attention away from the woman in the center of the hall and back toward the narrative she had constructed. "Guards," Eveline said. Her voice carried. Calm, authoritative. "The banished traitor has violated the terms of her exile. Remove her immediately." Nobody moved. Serafina watched the guards. 12 of them, positioned along the walls. 8 were Eveline's replacements, identifiable by their new uniforms and their uncertain postures. 4 were original Draven Guard, and those 4 were looking at General Thorn, who had not moved from his position by the eastern wall, and whose crossed arms and stone face were communicating a very clear message to anyone trained to read a commanding officer's body language. "Stand down. Wait." The 8 hesitated. An order from the consort to be carried weight. An unspoken countermand from the general who had trained them carried more. The hesitation lasted 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, the power dynamics of the room shifted in a way that everyone present could feel, like the barometric drop before a storm. Serafina spoke. "I invoke the right of reckoning." 5 words. They landed in the silence like a hammer on an anvil. The elder, still standing at his interrupted ceremony, visibly flinched. The right of reckoning. A foundational law of pack governance so old that most wolves had never heard it invoked. Any wolf with a grievance against the crown could demand to be heard at the assembly. It could not be denied. It could not be deferred. It was older than the throne itself, written into the bedrock of wolf law during the founding era, and violating it would delegitimize the crown in front of every alpha on the continent. Eveline knew this. Serafina could see the knowledge hit her. The micro-expressions, the fractional widening of the eyes, the almost imperceptible clench of the jaw. Eveline had not prepared for this because Eveline had assumed the evidence was destroyed, and without evidence, there was no reason to invoke anything. A banished Luna making empty accusations could be dismissed. A banished Luna invoking foundational law could not. "You have no standing," Eveline said. Her voice was controlled, but the register had shifted. Higher, tighter. The sound of a mechanism operating under more stress than it was designed to handle. "You were stripped of title and banished. The right of reckoning applies to members of the kingdom. You are not a member." "The right of reckoning applies to any wolf," Serafina said. Not to Eveline, to the room. She was speaking to every alpha, every noble, every common wolf in the standing galleries. Any wolf, born within or bonded to the kingdom. The mate bond is not dissolved by banishment. It is not dissolved by decree. It is not dissolved by the will of the alpha or the ruling of the court. I am bonded to the crown. The bond stands, and I invoke my right to be heard. She could feel Kael's eyes on her. The weight of his gaze was physical. She did not look at him. Not yet. Looking at him now would make this personal, and personal could be managed, contained, redirected by Eveline's manipulation. This had to stay public. political, structural. I address the assembly, Serafina continued. Not the crown, the assembly, because the crown has been compromised. The room erupted. Not in chaos, in the controlled, pressurized buzz of 200 wolves processing a statement that challenged the legitimacy of the throne in real time. Alphas leaned toward each other. Whispered consultations. The front rows were a sea of tight faces and calculating eyes. On the night of my banishment, I was charged with treason based on a forged letter carrying my seal. That letter contained classified military intelligence, specifically troop positions, patrol rotations, and supply cache locations for the southern border garrisons. That intelligence was used by the Fenris rogue clan to attack and destroy the garrison at Hollow Creek. 14 wolves died. Silence again. The number hit hard. Everyone in that room knew someone who had known someone at Hollow Creek. The evidence used to convict me was fabricated by Eveline. The intelligence in that letter could only have come from someone with direct access to the Alpha's classified war room briefings. I did not have that access. The Luna's role does not include operational military intelligence. Eveline, as the Alpha's personal advisor, attended every classified briefing for 8 months. Eveline's face was marble. Perfect. Still. But her hands, which had been folded at her waist, were now at her sides, and her fingers were working. Small, involuntary movements. The body betraying what the face would not. In the weeks since my banishment, Eveline has replaced 3 border garrison commanders with her own operatives. She has created a parallel command structure that bypasses the military chain of command. She has diverted Draven treasury funds to purchase weapons that were then supplied to rogue clans. And 3 nights ago, she sent a team of assassins to the northern territories to kill me before I could stand where I am standing now. The buzz became a roar. Alphas were on their feet. The standing galleries pressed forward. The guards along the walls shifted, uncertain, caught between competing authorities and the growing energy of a crowd that was tipping towards something dangerous. These are accusations, Eveline said. Her voice cut through the noise with the practiced precision of someone trained to command attention. Unsubstantiated accusations from a convicted traitor seeking to overturn her own sentence. Where is the proof? Where are the documents? Where is a single piece of evidence to support any of this? And there it was. The moment Eveline had been steering toward. The question she knew could not be answered because Kale had burned the answer 13 days ago in a room in the northern territories. She was smiling, not outwardly, behind the marble, in the place where she kept the real version of herself. Serafina felt the room tilt. The Alphas were watching her, waiting. The right of reckoning demanded a hearing, but a hearing without evidence was just noise, and wolves respected action, not words. This was the moment, the blade edge. Everything balanced on what happened in the next 10 seconds. Serafina looked at Kael for the first time. She found his eyes, and she held them, and she did not speak. She let the bond do the talking, let it flood the space between them with everything she had been carrying. The cold, the storm, the 3 days between life and death, the child growing inside her, the assassin crawling through the walls, the fire consuming the evidence, the 13 days of forced march to stand in this room and face the man who had thrown her away. She sent it all down the wire. Unfiltered, unprotected. Every wound, every scar. Every night she had lain awake feeling the bond hum between them and knowing that the man on the other end was sleeping beside the woman who had orchestrated her destruction. Kael's face changed. Not the controlled shifts she had seen before. This was tectonic. She watched the color drain from his skin, watched his pupils dilate, watched the muscles in his jaw lock so hard she could hear his teeth creaking from 20 feet away. The bond was hitting him with the accumulated weight of 2 months of truth, and it was hitting him the way avalanches hit, not with a single impact, but with an escalating, compounding force that built and built and built. His hand gripped the arm of the throne behind him. The iron bent. Kael, Eveline's voice was sharp, a whip crack designed to snap his attention back to her. She is manipulating the bond. This is exactly what a traitor... Quiet. The word came from Kael. 1 syllable. Spoken at a volume that should not have carried past the first row, but somehow filled the entire hall. Every wolf heard it. Every wolf felt it. The alpha voice. The frequency that bypasses the conscious mind and lands directly in the hindbrain, in the place where hierarchy lives, in the ancient architecture of pack biology that makes a wolf's legs go weak and its head go down. Evelyn stopped talking. Not because she chose to, because her body obeyed before her mind could override it. Her mouth closed, her chin dropped a fraction of an inch. The involuntary submission of a wolf who has just been hit with an alpha command at close range. Kale stepped down from the throne. 1 step. 2. 3. He was moving toward Seraphina, and the crowd peeled back from his path the way water parts before the bow of a ship. His eyes were locked on her face, on her belly, on the impossible, undeniable evidence that the woman he had condemned to death had been carrying his child when he sent her into the storm. He stopped 6 feet from her, close enough to touch, close enough for her to see the vein pulsing in his temple and the sweat beading along his hairline despite the cold of the hall. Close enough to smell the conflict on him, adrenaline and cortisol, and the sharp metallic scent of a wolf whose body is producing combat hormones while its mind is trying desperately to process information that contradicts everything it has believed for 2 months. Is it mine? His voice was wrecked, scraped raw. The voice of a man standing on the edge of a cliff and looking down. You know it is. He flinched. A full-body flinch, the kind that starts in the chest and radiates outward to every extremity. Because he did know. The bond told him. The bond had been telling him for 2 months, singing its constant, ignorable song, and he had ignored it because ignoring it was easier than confronting what it meant. And now the thing he had been ignoring was standing in front of him with his child in her belly, and the bond was screaming so loud it was drowning out every other signal in his body. I did not know, he said, and the words were so small and so broken and so completely inadequate that they hung in the air like the last breath of a dying animal. You did not ask. Seraphina's voice was steady, flat, the voice of a woman who had burned through every soft emotion she possessed and found something harder underneath. You did not investigate. You did not question the evidence. You did not look at the woman you had sworn to protect and ask yourself whether maybe, just maybe, the story you were being fed was designed to destroy the only person in your court who could see what was really happening. Seraphina, you threw me into a blizzard, pregnant, in the worst storm in 100 years. You gave me 1 hour to die. And then you went back to your throne and you sat down and you let the woman who orchestrated all of it sleep in my bed. The silence in the hall was so deep it had texture. Every wolf in the room was holding their breath. This was not politics anymore. This was not law or ceremony or the formal mechanisms of pack governance. This was a woman burning a man alive with the truth in front of every soul he ruled, and the fire was so absolute and so justified that nobody could look away. Kael's hand reached toward her, stopped, dropped. His fingers curled into a fist at his side, and Seraphina saw the tremor in it, the fine, rapid vibration of a body that was generating more emotion than its nervous system could handle. Behind him, Evelyn moved. It was subtle, a shift in weight, a hand reaching into the folds of her gown. Seraphina saw it because she had spent 13 days training herself to see it, training her eyes to track threat in her peripheral vision while her focus held center, the way Rowan had taught her to fight. Block where you must. Strike where you can. Never stop watching the edges. Rowan! Her voice cracked through the hall like a gunshot. Rowan was already moving. He had seen it too, the hand in the gown, the shift in posture, the particular tension in Evelyn's shoulders that preceded violent action. He covered the distance between the northern column and the throne steps in 4 strides, and his blade came up just as Evelyn's hand came out of the gown, holding a dagger with a blade so thin it was nearly invisible. She was not aiming at Seraphina, she was aiming at Kael. The realization hit the room like a detonation. Evelyn was not trying to kill the Luna. She was trying to kill the king. In the chaos, in the confusion of accusations and confrontations, and the emotional earthquake of a returned Luna invoking ancient law, she was going to put a blade in Kael's back and blame it on the northern wolves who had just marched armed into the throne hall. It was the contingency plan. The backup. If the political operation failed, if the careful web of manipulation could not contain the truth, then the brute force option. Kill the Alpha. Blame the Northerners. Unite the kingdom in outrage against an external enemy. Install a puppet on the throne while the real power stayed in the shadows. Rowan's blade intercepted the dagger 3 inches from Kael's spine. The clash of metal was bright and sharp and final. Eveline twisted, tried to pull back for a second strike, and Rowan caught her wrist and wrenched the dagger free with a force that sent it skittering across the stone floor. Then everything happened at once. The 8 guards loyal to Eveline drew weapons. The 4 loyal to Thorn drew weapons. Thorn himself moved from the eastern wall with a speed that belied his age, barking orders to his men, and the throne hall split down the middle as wolves chose sides in real time, not based on allegiance or politics or careful calculation, but on the raw, instinctive assessment that every predator makes when violence erupts. Who do I stand with? Who do I stand against? Where is the threat? Where is the safety? Rowan's wolves surged forward, not attacking, forming a perimeter around Seraphina, a wall of northern fighters with blades drawn and teeth bared, closing around the pregnant Luna like an immune system closing around a vital organ. Gren was at the point, his massive body blocking the direct line between Seraphina and the fighting, his sword up, and his face locked into the expressionless focus of a man who has done this many times and intends to do it many more. Eveline pulled free of Rowan's grip. She was fast, faster than she had any right to be, and Seraphina remembered what Rowan had said. She is a weapon, built for this, trained for this. Eveline put distance between herself and Rowan, backing toward the far wall where her guards were engaging Thorn's men in a brutal close-quarters fight that was already producing the sound Seraphina would hear in her nightmares for years. The wet impact of blade on flesh, the grunt of a body absorbing a hit, the clatter of a weapon dropped by fingers that could no longer grip. "To me!" Eveline's voice rang out, and the word was a command that her operatives obeyed with the reflexive precision of soldiers hearing a fallback order. The 8 guards pulled toward her position, fighting through Thorn's line, taking casualties but consolidating. 3 went down. 5 made it to Eveline's side. The side door, the one Thorn had positioned himself near. Eveline was heading for it. She was going to run, going to disappear into the palace's labyrinth of corridors and passages and vanish the way Kale had vanished from the northern compound, because that was what weapons did when the mission failed. They extracted, preserved the asset, redeployed. Seraphina watched Eveline's hand close on the door handle and felt something in her chest that was as old and as uncompromising as the first winter. Not rage. Rage was hot, and it burned out. This was cold. This was the final, absolute refusal of a woman who had been thrown into the storm and had walked back out of it, and was not going to watch the woman who put her there walk out of a different door. "She does not leave this hall." Seraphina's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Rowan heard it. Gren heard it. 28 northern wolves heard it, and they moved with the unified, devastating coordination of a pack that has identified its prey and committed to the chase. Gren hit the side door before Eveline could open it. His shoulder drove the door shut with enough force to crack the frame, and he stood in front of it with his sword across his body and an expression that said nothing except, "This door is closed, and it will remain closed, and you are welcome to discuss the matter with my blade." Eveline spun. Her 5 remaining guards formed up around her. The throne hall was in full chaos now, fighting along the eastern wall, fighting near the main doors. Wolves who were not combatants pressing toward the exits, or pressing toward the fight depending on their nature. Blood on the flagstones. Torches knocked from their sconces, rolling on the ground, throwing wild shadows that made the whole scene look like something from a fever dream. Kael stood in the center of it all. He had not moved since Rowan intercepted the dagger aimed at his spine. He was standing exactly where Seraphina had found him, 6 feet from her, and his face held an expression that was beyond anything she had seen before. Beyond shock, beyond grief, beyond the particular anguish of a man discovering that the person he trusted most had just tried to put a knife in his back. He was watching Eveline, and the thing in his eyes was not anger, not yet. It was something that came before anger, the way the dropping barometric pressure comes before the hurricane. The terrible, dawning, irreversible recognition that everything he had believed for 2 months was a lie, and that the lie had cost him the woman he loved, and the child he did not know existed, and the loyalty of the people who had served him and the integrity of the kingdom his father and his father's father had built. The recognition was destroying him. Seraphina could see it happening in real time, the internal architecture collapsing. the load-bearing walls of certainty that had held him upright since the night of the banishment cracking and buckling and coming down in a cascade of structural failure that was going to leave nothing standing. Eveline saw it too. She saw the king breaking. And in her eyes, in those pale, precise, calculating eyes, Seraphina saw something she had not expected. Fear. Not of Kael, not of the northern wolves, not of General Thorn or the blades or the blood. Fear of the truth. The one thing Eveline's meticulous, years-long operation had been designed to prevent. The truth, spoken aloud, witnessed by hundreds, confirmed by the dagger she had pulled from her own gown and aimed at the back of the man she had claimed to serve. No forged documents, no manipulated evidence, no carefully constructed narrative. Just a woman with a blade and a caught expression and 200 wolves who had seen it all. Eveline's back hit the wall. Her guards tightened around her. Gren blocked the door. Thorn's men blocked the corridor. Rowan's wolves closed the circle. She was trapped. And across the hall, his hands shaking, his crown crooked on his head, his entire world reduced to rubble around his feet, Kael Draven drew his sword. The blade sang when it cleared the scabbard. A high, pure note that cut through the noise of the fighting like a tuning fork struck in the middle of a storm. Every wolf in the hall heard it. Every wolf knew that sound. The Alpha's blade, drawn in the throne hall. The last time a Draven king had drawn steel in the Great Hall, 2 provinces had burned. Kael pointed the blade at Eveline. His arm was steady. Whatever was breaking inside him had not reached his sword hand yet. Every wolf in this hall is my witness. His voice filled the room the way his blade had filled the silence. Total. Commanding. The voice of a king standing in the ruins of his own judgment, issuing the only order that the ruins left room for. Seal the doors, no one leaves. What happens next happens here. The great doors boomed shut. The sound echoed off the stone walls and the iron throne and the blood-spattered flagstones and the 200 wolves who were about to witness either the salvation or the destruction of the Draven kingdom. And in the center of the hall, her hand on her belly, the child kicking hard against her palm, Seraphina Vale watched the man who had banished her raise his sword against the woman who had made him do it, and she felt the bond between them pulse once, bright and agonizing and alive, and she understood with perfect clarity that whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine not just who ruled this kingdom, but who survived to see the morning. The sealed doors held, the torches guttered, the blood cooled on the stone, and nobody in that room knew yet that Kael was not running south. He was in the palace. He had been in the palace for 3 hours, and he was not alone. Kael came through the floor, not a door, not a window, the floor. A section of flagstone near the eastern wall that had been loosened from below, from the network of service tunnels that ran beneath the palace like veins beneath skin, tunnels that Eveline had mapped during her first month in the court, and that Kael had memorized because memorizing the invisible architecture of a building was how you owned it long before anyone knew you were inside. He emerged behind Thorn's line, silent, rising from the displaced stone like something born from the earth itself, and he was not alone. 4 wolves came up after him, rogue operatives who had been positioned in the tunnels for 72 hours, eating cold rations in the dark, waiting for the signal that the assembly had devolved into the chaos that Eveline's contingency plan required. The first one to die was a young guard named Marsh. He was 23. He had been in Thorn's unit for 2 years, and he was good at his job, and he was facing the wrong direction when Kael's blade entered the space between his shoulder blades and found his heart with the precise, practiced efficiency of a man who had done this many times and felt nothing about it except the professional satisfaction of a clean stroke. Marsh went down without a sound. The wolf next to him turned at the movement, and Kael's second blade caught him across the throat before the turn was complete. 2 of Thorn's men, dead in 4 seconds, and the eastern defensive line that had been containing Eveline's guards suddenly had a hole in it the size of a freight train. Thorn saw it happen. The general spun toward the breach, and 20 years of combat experience processed the situation in the time it took his heart to beat twice. Kael. 4 rogues, his line broken, Eveline's remaining guards surging toward the gap. "To me!" Thorn roared. His voice was a weapon in itself, forged by decades of command, and the guards who heard it responded with the reflexive obedience of men who had been trained to treat that voice as the difference between life and death. Three of his loyal wolves converged on the breach. Thorn met Cale himself. The fight between them was nothing like the training yard demonstration Seraphina had watched in the Draven court. It was ugly, desperate. The sound of two men trying to kill each other with sharpened metal in a confined space, grunting with effort, breathing in harsh, ragged bursts, their blades meeting with impacts that jarred the bones and sent shockwaves up through wrist and elbow and shoulder. Thorn was older, slower by a fraction of a second, but he had something Cale did not have, which was 40 years of experience fighting wolves who were faster and younger and more technically skilled, and the particular savage cunning of a man who had survived every one of those fights by finding the single mistake his opponent made and driving a blade through it. Cale's mistake was arrogance. He had never fought a general of Thorn's caliber. His kills were ambushes, targeted operations, blades in the dark. He had never stood toe-to-toe with a wolf whose entire life had been built around the art of direct combat. And when Thorn feinted high and drove low, Cale's parry was a half-second late. Thorn's blade opened a gash across Cale's left thigh that went deep enough to hit the femoral artery. Cale staggered, looked down at the wound with an expression of mild surprise, as though his body had done something unexpected and slightly rude. Then his leg buckled and he went to one knee, and Thorn's sword came around in a flat arc that would have taken his head if one of the rogue operatives had not thrown himself into the general's path, absorbing the blow across his shoulder, screaming as the blade bit through muscle and collarbone. Cale used the distraction. He crawled, not toward the door, not toward escape, toward Eveline, dragging his bleeding leg behind him, leaving a wide, dark smear across the flagstones, moving with the mechanical determination of something that had been given a purpose and would complete it regardless of what its body had to say about the matter. Eveline saw him coming. Their eyes met across 12 feet of blood-slicked stone, and in that exchange, Seraphina saw something she had not expected. Recognition, not of the man, of the situation. Eveline looked at Cale crawling toward her with his life pumping out of his leg, and she saw herself, a weapon reaching the end of its operational life. A tool that had been used to its breaking point and was now failing, and the woman who had deployed that tool was already calculating whether the remains were useful or whether they needed to be discarded. "Get up," Eveline said, not with compassion, with the flat impatience of someone watching a machine malfunction at a critical moment. Cale could not get up. His face had gone the color of old wax. His hands were leaving red prints on the stone. He was bleeding out on the floor of the throne hall, and the woman he had served, the woman he had killed for and tracked for and crawled through frozen tunnels for, looked at him the way she would look at a broken chair. That was the moment Cale Draven understood what Eveline was. Not because of Seraphina's accusations, not because of the dagger aimed at his back, not because of the forged evidence or the replaced commanders or the funded rogues, because of the way she looked at a dying man who had given her everything and saw only a tool that no longer worked. Cale had spent his life surrounded by wolves who served out of loyalty, out of pack bond, out of the ancient and imperfect but fundamentally real connection between alpha and wolf that made a pack something more than a collection of predators sharing territory. And Eveline had none of it. She was a void where connection should have been, a human-shaped absence that mimicked belonging well enough to fool everyone around her but could not sustain the mimicry when the pressure exceeded what her performance could handle. He saw it. And seeing it completed the demolition that Seraphina's truth had started. Cale moved. He crossed the space between himself and Eveline in 6 strides, and his wolves, his loyal wolves, the ones who had watched him walk into this trap and had been waiting with increasing desperation for their alpha to wake up and act like the king they had sworn to follow, fell in behind him. Not because he ordered them to, because the thing radiating from his body, the barely contained volcanic fury of a man who has just realized the scope of his own blindness, was so powerful that it pulled every loyal wolf in the room toward him, the way gravity pulls objects toward a center of mass. Eveline's remaining guards saw what was coming. 3 of them dropped their weapons, put their hands up, stepped back from the woman they had been protecting with the sudden animal clarity of creatures who have just realized the predator they thought was behind them is actually in front of them, and it is looking at the person they are standing next to. 2 did not surrender. They charged. Rowan intercepted the first one with a blade strike that dropped the man to his knees, and Gren took the second with a shoulder tackle that sounded like a car hitting a wall. Both were subdued, bound. removed from the equation with the efficient brutality of a military operation closing its final objectives. Evelyn stood alone. Her back was against the eastern wall. Cale was on the floor at her feet, his breathing shallow and rapid, his eyes fixed on nothing. The 5 guards who had formed her last line of defense were gone, dead or surrendered or dragged away. She stood in a semicircle of wolves who had the look of a pack that has cornered its prey, and the only thing preventing an immediate and violent resolution was the fact that every wolf in that room was watching, and what happened next would be remembered and retold and judged for generations. Cale stopped 3 feet from her. His sword hung at his side. The point touched the flagstone with a faint metallic whisper. "Talk," he said. Evelyn looked at him. The porcelain was gone. The serenity. The mask. What was left was the raw material underneath, and it was not what anyone expected. Not fear, not defiance. Exhaustion. The deep structural fatigue of a person who has been performing a character for so long that the performance has consumed most of what was underneath, and the remainder is barely enough to stand on. You want a confession. I want the truth, the actual truth, every piece of it, from the beginning. Why? You already know. She told you. Your bond told you. Every wolf in this room has already decided. What difference does it make if I say the words? Because I need to hear you say them. I need every wolf in this hall to hear you say them. And you are going to say them because the alternative is that I hand you to General Thorne, and Thorne lost 2 men tonight because of your operation. And what he will do to get the information will make this conversation feel like a kindness. Evelyn's eyes moved to Thorne. The general stood 6 feet away, blood on his blade, blood on his face, and an expression that was not so much angry as it was ancient. The look of a soldier who has seen the inside of war and knows exactly what happens in the rooms where information is extracted from people who do not wish to give it. She talked. It came out in a flat, continuous stream, the way water comes out of a pipe when the pressure finally exceeds the seal's capacity. The Rogue Coalition, the 2-year infiltration plan, the systematic dismantling of the Draven border defenses, the forged letter, the manipulated evidence, the isolation of Kyle from every advisor who might have challenged the narrative, the assassination team sent to the Northern Territories, the weapons purchased with Draven treasury funds, the plan to assault the Assembly and decapitate the kingdom's leadership in a single night. She told them everything, not because she was brave, not because she had experienced a crisis of conscience, because she was standing in a room full of wolves who could smell a lie the way sharks smell blood, and she had calculated correctly that a full confession delivered voluntarily carried a marginally higher survival probability than a partial confession extracted by force. When she finished, the silence in the hall was the silence of a graveyard, not peaceful, weighted, full of the things that had been buried there. Cale stared at her for a long time. His face was a landscape of devastation, the jaw, the eyes, the lines that had deepened in the last hour until he looked 10 years older than the man who had sat on the throne when the evening began. He was a king who had just heard the full accounting of his own destruction, spoken aloud by the architect, in a room full of the people he was supposed to protect and had failed. He turned away from Evelyn, handed his sword to Thorne. The gesture was simple and enormous. The Alpha King of the Draven Kingdom disarming himself in front of his court. Thorne took the blade, held it, looked at Kyle with an expression that was somewhere between grief and respect. "Secure her," Cale said, "and the others, all of them. Every operative she named, every guard she placed. I want them found, detained, and held for formal trial before the Assembly." "Yes, my king." Kyle walked towards Seraphina. The crowd parted, again. But this time the energy was different, not fear, not shock, something heavier. The collective uncomfortable weight of 200 wolves watching a man walk toward the consequences of the worst decision of his life. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the blood vessels in his eyes burst from the pressure of what he had been enduring. Close enough that she could see the tremor in his hands, which he was not trying to hide because he was past hiding things, past pretending, past the armor and the authority and the practiced control that had defined every public moment of his life. He was stripped, flayed by his own actions, standing before her with nothing between his skin and the air. He went to his knees. The sound of the Alpha King's knees hitting the flagstone of his own throne hall was a sound that would echo through the history of the Draven Kingdom for the next 100 years. Not the sound of impact, the sound of meaning. The most powerful wolf on the continent kneeling before the woman he had condemned, in front of his court, in front of his generals, in front of every alpha and noble and common wolf who had gathered to witness a coronation and was instead witnessing the most public act of contrition any kingdom had ever seen. I did this to you. His voice was barely audible, stripped to its fundamental frequency. The voice beneath the alpha, beneath the king. The voice of a man. I did all of this to you. I believed her. I believed her over you, over the bond, over everything I knew to be true about who you are, and I sent you to die. You and my child. I sent you both to die. Serafina looked down at him, at the dark hair, the crown that had tilted on his head when he knelt, the hands that had gripped the throne while her world burned, now open and empty on his thighs. She could feel the bond pulsing between them, feel the anguish pouring through it from his end, so raw and so total that it took effort not to buckle under the weight of it. She had imagined this moment. In the northern camp, during the sleepless nights, during the long march south, she had played this scene 100 times in her mind. In some versions, she forgave him. In some versions, she raged. In some versions, she said nothing and simply walked away and let the silence be her answer. She had not expected the version that actually happened. The version where she looked at the broken man on his knees and felt nothing that was simple. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness was a clean word, and there was nothing clean about what she felt. Not rage. Rage had burned itself out days ago, consumed by the same fire that had consumed the evidence and the plan and the woman she had been before. Not indifference. She was not capable of indifference toward the man whose child was kicking inside her at this very moment, turning, pressing, insisting on its existence the way it had been insisting since the night in the snow. What she felt was something that did not have a word in any language she knew. The feeling of looking at someone you loved more than your own survival and understanding, with the absolute clarity of someone who has seen the bottom, that the love is real and the damage is real and one does not cancel the other, that you can hold both in the same hand and neither one disappears. Get up, she said. He looked at her. The eyes she had loved, the eyes she had memorized in the dark, broken open now, showing everything he had spent his whole life hiding, the fear, the grief, the desperate drowning hope that she would say something that could undo what he had done, even though they both knew that nothing could undo it. Some choices are permanent, some damage does not heal. It only scars, and the scar becomes part of the architecture, and you learn to build around it, or you collapse. Get up, Kyle, a king does not kneel. I am not kneeling as a king. I am kneeling as the man who... I know what you are kneeling as. Her voice cracked. One crack. Small and deep, like a fault line in stone that looks insignificant on the surface and goes all the way to the core. She sealed it, held. Get up. We are not done. He rose, slowly. The way a man rises when his body has been carrying something too heavy for too long and the joints have forgotten how to move without protest. He stood in front of her, and they were face to face, and the space between them was 6 inches and 2 months and a lifetime. I am not coming back. She said it clearly, calmly, with the same tone she had used to invoke the right of reckoning, and the words hit him the same way. Foundation level. I am not your Luna. I am not your consort. I am not the woman who stood at the base of your throne and asked you to believe her. That woman died in a snowfield 5 miles from this palace, and what grew back from her is something different, and it does not belong to you. Serafina, please.
Do not. Do not say please. You do not get to say please. You had your chance to say please on the night you threw me out. You could have paused, could have questioned, could have given me 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute of the benefit of the doubt that any mate owes the person they are bonded to. You chose not to. And the consequence of that choice is that I am standing here as a free woman telling you that the bond between us will exist as long as we both breathe. And I will honor it the way I honor a scar. I will carry it. I will acknowledge it. I will not pretend it is not there. But I will not let it own me. Not anymore. The tears on his face caught the torchlight. He was not wiping them away. Was not hiding them. A man who had spent his entire life constructing an impenetrable exterior was standing in his throne hall crying in front of his entire kingdom,
and the fact that he did not try to stop it was perhaps the first genuinely brave thing he had done in 2 months. "The child," he said, and his voice broke so completely on the word that it came out in 2 separate pieces. Seraphina's hand went to her belly. The kick against her palm was strong, decisive. The child had opinions about this conversation, apparently. "The child will know who its father is. Will know the good and the bad of it. I will not poison that. I will not use this baby as a weapon or a bargaining chip or a vehicle for the anger I have every right to carry. But the child will be raised in the north, in Ironhold, by me. And you will be a father to the extent that you earn the right to be one, which means doing the work of becoming a man that a child can look up to without flinching." Kael closed his eyes. The tears tracked silently down the lines of his face, following the grooves that the last 2 months had carved, and Seraphina watched them fall and felt the bond ache with an intensity that was almost musical, a long, sustained note of grief and love and loss that resonated in the hollow spaces between her ribs. She stepped back. 1 step. The distance between them widened by 12 inches, and the 12 inches might as well have been 12 miles. "Fix your kingdom, Kael. You owe it that. Every wolf who died at Hollow Creek, every commander Eveline replaced, every alliance she sabotaged, every lie she told using your authority as a seal. You owe them the work of rebuilding what you let her destroy." She turned away from him, walked toward Rowan, who was standing at the edge of the northern column, his wolves arrayed behind him, his scarred face unreadable. She felt Kael's eyes on her back, felt the bond stretch and strain like a cable bearing too much load, singing with tension, vibrating with the impossible physics of 2 souls connected by something ancient and immutable being pulled in opposite directions by choices that could not be unmade. She did not look back. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks with the slow, grinding inevitability of a glacier reshaping a valley. Eveline was tried before the full assembly, not a military tribunal, a public trial, with every alpha and every noble and every representative from every corner of the kingdom present. Thorn served as chief prosecutor. The evidence was Eveline's own confession, witnessed by 200 wolves, supplemented by testimony from captured operatives, and the mountain of intelligence that Thorn's quietly preserved records provided. She was convicted on 19 counts: treason, conspiracy, murder, fraud, espionage. The list went on, each charge landing with the weight of a stone added to a cairn built over a grave. She was sentenced to permanent exile under guard, stripped of any name or affiliation, cast out in the formal and final way that wolf law reserved for its worst offenders. She would live because the assembly voted against execution by a narrow margin, but she would live as nothing. No pack, no territory, no identity. A ghost walking through a world that had decided she did not exist. Kael did not survive the night. He bled out on the throne hall floor while his employer's confession echoed off the walls above him. Nobody knelt beside him. Nobody held his hand. He died the way he had lived. Alone, efficient, and without ceremony. Marin covered his body with a cloth when it was over, not out of respect but out of the basic human decency that she extended to everything that had once been alive, regardless of what it had done while breathing. Kael abdicated 3 days after the trial. Not the throne. The absolute authority that the Alpha King had held for generations. He dissolved the Crown Oversight Council, reinstated every commander Eveline had replaced, established a council of alphas drawn from the major houses to share governance, with the king as first among equals rather than sole arbiter. It was the most radical restructuring of Draven power in living memory, and he did it with the methodical, unflinching thoroughness of a man dismantling a building he had discovered was constructed on rotten foundations. He stood before the assembly for the last time and spoke with the raw, damaged honesty of someone who has been broken down to his basic components and is trying to figure out which ones are worth keeping. I failed this kingdom, not because I was weak, because I was proud. Because I believed that the strength of the crown was the strength of a single man sitting on a single throne, making decisions that no single man has the right to make alone. I trusted the wrong person. I condemned the right one. I let my fear of appearing foolish outweigh my obligation to seek the truth. And wolves died because of it. People I swore to protect died because I chose my pride over my duty, and no amount of restructuring or reform will bring them back. Aquí is done. He paused. The hall was quiet. I am not asking for forgiveness. I have not earned it. I am telling you what I am going to do, which is spend every day I have left trying to rebuild what I let someone else destroy. Not because it will erase what happened, because it is the only response to failure that a man can live with. General Thorne stood in his usual position against the eastern wall, arms crossed, face stone. But his eyes, which had been hard and closed for months, were open now. Watching his king with the careful, cautious attention of a man deciding whether the foundation being poured is strong enough to build on. The kingdom did not heal quickly. Healing is a word people use to make the process of structural repair sound gentler than it is. What happened in the Draven Kingdom was demolition followed by construction. The rogue networks that Evelyn had cultivated were dismantled. Border defenses were rebuilt. The alliances she had sabotaged were renegotiated, slowly, painfully, with the humbling awareness that trust, once broken, does not reassemble itself. It grows back, if it grows back at all, as something different, thinner, more cautious. Scarred, Seraphina returned to Ironhold with Rowan and his wolves. The march north felt different from the march south, slower, quieter. The adrenaline of the mission had drained, and what was left was the bone-deep fatigue of people who had done something enormous and were only beginning to understand the weight of it. Rowan walked beside her the entire way. He did not talk much. He did not need to. His presence was a statement that did not require words. I am here. I am not leaving. The rest we figure out as we go. On the third night, camped in the same cave system where she had sat apart and watched the fire and thought about Kael, Seraphina sat apart again. Rowan found her again, sat beside her again. The fire popped and hissed and threw orange light on the stone walls. How do you feel? He asked. She thought about it. Really thought, the way she had stopped allowing herself to think during the weeks of planning and marching and surviving. She let the question settle into her body and listened for the answer. I feel like a house that burned down and somebody cleared the lot. Empty. Open. There is a difference. He almost smiled. The ghost again. Closer to full this time. Close enough that she could see the shape it would take if it ever arrived completely. The Northern Territories need a leader, Rowan said. Not just a military commander, someone who understands politics. Diplomacy. The messy, complicated business of holding communities together when the threats are not always wolves with swords, but hunger, isolation, the slow erosion that happens when people feel forgotten. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a home. The job is part of it, but it is not the point. She looked at him. The scar. The green eyes. The patient, unshakable steadiness that had carried her from the snowfield to the throne hall and back again. She did not love him. Not yet. Not the way she had loved Kael, with the consuming, all-encompassing fire that burned so hot it left nothing to sustain itself when the wind changed. What she felt for Rowan was something more durable, quieter, built on shared experience rather than chemical destiny. The kind of thing that grows when two people face the same direction and keep walking. I will think about it, she said. He nodded, stood, walked back to the camp. Let her sit with the fire and the silence and the child moving inside her and the slow, tentative process of imagining a future that she had built herself rather than one that had been assigned to her by a bond she never chose. Months passed. Seraphina chose Ironhold. She did not choose it the way people choose things in stories, with a single dramatic moment and a swelling orchestral score. She chose it the way people choose things in life, gradually, through accumulation, through the daily act of waking up in a place and finding that the place fit, and that the person she was becoming had room to breathe there. She became the leader of the Northern Territories, not through coronation, but through competence. She reorganized the trade routes that connected the isolated northern communities. She established a communication network that linked Ironhold to the Midland settlements. She sat in meetings that were tedious and necessary and unglamorous. The real work of governance that nobody puts in the stories because it does not involve swords or declarations or dramatic confrontations in throne halls. Rowan was beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, beside. The position suited him. He had spent years as the sole alpha of the Northern Hold, carrying the weight alone, and the relief of having a partner who could share the load without competing for it changed something in him, softened the edges that years of isolation had sharpened. He smiled more. Not a lot. Rowan would never be a man who smiled a lot. But the ghost became occasional flesh, and when it appeared, usually during the evening hours when they sat by the fire and talked about nothing important, it transformed his scarred face into something that was not handsome in the conventional sense, but was warm and real and entirely itself. The child was born in late spring. A boy. He came into the world screaming with an enthusiasm that made Marin, who had delivered more babies than she could count, raise an eyebrow and remark that the lungs, at least, were in excellent working order. He had his father's dark hair, his mother's eyes, and a grip strength that, when he closed his tiny fist around Seraphina's finger, made her understand for the first time what people meant when they said their heart existed outside their body. She named him Brennan, after the young soldier at Hollow Creek who had shown her his daughter's drawing, a wolf with flowers growing out of its fur. Word reached the Draven court. Kael received the news alone, in the same chamber where he had reviewed the forged letter that had started everything. He sat at his desk for a long time. A very long time. The candle burned down to a stub. The shadows grew. He sat in the dark and felt the bond pulse with something new. Not grief, not the familiar gnawing ache that had been his constant companion since the night Seraphina walked into the storm. Something lighter, brighter. The faint, distant warmth of a new life connected to his blood, existing somewhere beyond the mountains, breathing and screaming and gripping its mother's finger with the strength it had inherited from him. He did not go north. He wanted to. The wanting was physical, a hunger that sat in his chest like a second heart. But he understood, in the way that only a man who has lost everything through his own choices can understand, that wanting was not the same as deserving. That the path between where he was and where his child was had to be earned in small steps, each one proving something that words could not prove. That he had changed. That the man who had thrown his pregnant mate into a blizzard was not the man who would show up at Ironhold's gates asking to hold his son. He wrote a letter instead. Not to Seraphina, to Brennan. A letter the boy would not be able to read for years, written in the rough, unpolished hand of a man who had never been taught to express emotion on paper, because emotion was a weakness and weakness was death. And he was only now, at the age of 34, standing in the rubble of the life those lessons had built, learning that the lessons themselves were the weakness. He wrote about the night Brennan's mother had stood in the throne hall and said the thing that no one else had been brave enough to say. He wrote about what it felt like to kneel on the stone floor and understand that the person you hurt most in the world is standing over you, and she is stronger than you ever were, and she does not need you. And the fact that she does not need you is not the tragedy you thought it was. It is the proof that she has become something extraordinary, something that your own cruelty and cowardice could not destroy, and the right response to that is not grief. It is awe. He sealed the letter, set it aside. He would send it when the time was right, when he had earned the right to have his words read by the boy who carried his bloodline and his mate's indestructible will and the future of 2 territories in his tiny, clenched fists. The kingdom healed. Slowly. In the way that real things heal, which is unevenly, incompletely, with setbacks and complications and days when the whole enterprise felt like it was going to fall apart again. But it held. The Council of Alphas held. The rebuilt alliances held. The border defenses, now commanded by officers who had been vetted with a thoroughness that bordered on paranoid, held. And in the north, in a fortified compound built into the mountains, a woman who had been thrown away sat on the wall at dusk and watched the sky turn colors that she did not have names for. Her son was asleep in the room behind her, making the small, unconscious sounds of a baby dreaming about things that babies dream about. Rowan was somewhere below, checking the evening patrols, his voice carrying faintly on the cold air. The bond in her chest hummed its endless song, connecting her to a man in a distant palace who was sitting alone in the dark, writing letters to a child he had never held. She did not hate him anymore. The hatred had burned itself out the way forest fires burn themselves out, consuming everything available and then dying in the ash. What was left was not forgiveness. She was not sure she would ever fully forgive him. Some wounds go too deep for the skin to close completely over them. They remain open, not bleeding but present, a permanent record of what happened there. What was left was something more complicated and more honest than forgiveness. It was the understanding that people are not permanent things. They are processes, ongoing, unfinished, capable of acts so terrible they reshape the landscape and then, in the same lifetime, capable of the slow, grueling work of becoming something better. Kael was not the man who had banished her. He was not yet the man who deserved to know his son. He was somewhere in between, in the difficult, unglamorous middle where the real work happens and the outcome was not yet written. She put her hand on the cold stone wall, felt the ancient rock beneath her palm. Solid, patient, the kind of thing that endures not because it is unbreakable, but because it has already been broken, over and over, by ice and heat and the relentless pressure of time. And what remains is the part that nothing can break because it has already survived everything. The stars came out. The same stars that had burned above her on the night she collapsed in the snow, the night the world ended and began simultaneously. She looked up at them and felt something that was not happiness, because happiness is a word for a feeling that arrives complete and stays put, and what she felt was motion. Forward motion. The steady, unspectacular momentum of a life being lived on terms she had chosen, in a place she had earned, surrounded by people who had seen her at her lowest and had carried her anyway. She breathed. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The way Marin had taught her, the way she had taught herself, the way she would teach Brennan someday when he was old enough to understand that breathing is not automatic. It is a choice. And every breath you take on the other side of the thing that was supposed to kill you is a victory so quiet that nobody notices except you. And that is enough. That has always been enough.